The sunlight in Athens is honey to the rich, and poison to the villain. Kalles was stunning and hid behind a broken marble column in the Agora market. Sunlight stretched his thin figure as if it were trampled at any time. The air is mixed with the smell of olive oil, rotten fruits, and livestock. This is the breath of survival. The sour smell or fragrance in every corner represents an opportunity or a trap. His eyes were as sharp as a keel, and the crowds he was walking towards, pearly and precious women, hurrying businessmen, and soldiers wearing short swordsmen. He is not admiring the prosperity of this great city-state, but looking for a treasure to find a money bag that would make him sweep tonight. A businessman from Corinth, dressed in a beautiful manner, but his eyes were scattered, and the money bag on his waist was full of like a ripe fig, shaking lightly with his fat steps. It's him. Kalles took a deep breath and merged himself into the stream, like a drop of water entering the stream, quietly breathing. His movements were flowing and natural, and his years of street life turned stealth into instinct, a dance of surviving in the city forest. Wiggle, collision, apologize, and complete it in one go. The warm leather money bag had fallen into his hands, heavy, bringing a false sense of security. Without a trace of his life, he turned into a narrow alley, which was his kingdom, a mystery composed of shadows and garbage. However, just when he thought he had obtained a hand again, an iron-like hand grabbed his wrist. Kalles' heart sank, and he turned back and met with a pair of cold eyes. It was a soldier from the city-state. His old leather armor was shining with dazzling light under the sun at the entrance of the alley. The screams of the merchant came from the market, like a song of sorrow played for him. "It's you again, Kalles." The sound of the soldier was not warm at all, as if he was telling a certain fact: God is above, can't you, a mouse, find some serious things? Kalles tried to remove the picture, but the other party's arm strap was not moving. He didn't answer, but just looked at the other party coldly. At the bottom of Athens, praying for the gods is the most useless act. He knew better than anyone that the gods on Mount Olympus had long stopped paying attention to the suffering of mortals. All they left were 7 disasters that were integrated into the air. Diseases took away his infant parents, and let him learn to eat grass roots, and the shadow of the war made every soldier's eyes full of anger. The cold stern locked his hands and pushed him towards the familiar prison. The tide was dark and the water droplets poured out from the stone walls were filled with a musty smell. He was pushed in roughly, and the iron door blew a heavy thrust behind him, separating the sun and freedom. The prisoners of the same prisoner came to see him numb or unkindly look. Kalles didn't care. He narrowed to the darkest corner, leaning against the cold stone wall, and closing his eyes. Here, sleep is the only escape. However, the dream situation tonight is different from before. It's no longer those broken, about hunger and chase. He fell into a chaotic space, surrounded by a fog full of pain and resentment. A woman's will was hiding in the fog, her face was blurred, but her eyes were filled with endless sorrow and regret. She held an ancient box in her hand, and the box had opened. What was poured out was not the mist, but the real disasters, the green poison of the plague, the bloody flame of the war, the black blade of betrayal. 7 disasters were surging him like poisonous snakes, making him unable to breathe. Just as he was about to be swallowed, a low and ancient voice echoed deep in his brain, not any language he heard, which could make him clearly understand its meaning. Look for the forbidden territory of Olympus, where Pandora's things await its inheritor. The woman's phantom dissipated, but the sound was engraved in his soul like a brand. At the same time, a strange feeling surged into my heart. He could see the emotions outside the cell. The commander of the soldier was urging his subordinates. Under the sense of cheapness in his heart, there was a faint golden light that was not his own. It was from the will of a god, cold and proud, overlooking the mortal like a silly man. This perception was so clear and so strange that it made him feel pain. He suddenly opened his eyes, sweating profusely. The cell was still that cell, but the world seemed to be different in his eyes. The feeling of exploring the deep secrets of others made him feel unprecedentedly terrified. Who is he? Who is Pandora? The iron door made a harsh friction sound, breaking his thoughts. A woman stood outside the door, facing the light, unable to see her face clearly. She is not like a soldier, wearing a simple long robe of a scholar, and is calm and wise. Kalles? Kalles looked at her vigilantly, without making a sound. Come with me, your money has been cleared. The woman said, and the soldiers respectfully opened the prison. Kalles followed her with a belly full of doubt and walked out of the suffocating prisoner. The air outside was unprecedentedly fresh, but the confusion in his heart became even heavier. Who is this strange woman? Why did she save herself? He followed tightly, through several streets and alleys, and came to a remote courtyard. The woman stopped and turned around. Under the moonlight, Kalles finally saw her face clearly. She was about 30 years old and had a beautiful face, but her gray eyes were as deep as an ancient well, as if she could see through everything. I am Elena, a student who studies ancient mythology. She introduced herself, but Kalles could not read the pureness of a scholar from her eyes, which was a mixed review, a pretext, and even a complex and scattered emotion. What do you want? Kalles opened the door to the mountain, and he never believed in unreasonable kindness. A difficult smile appeared on the corner of Elena's mouth. She stared at Kalles, her eyes as if she was about to penetrate his skin, looking directly at the secret deep in his soul. What I want is something you don't know. I save you not from kindness, but because you are about to become a huge threat, or a hope. Kalles raised his eyebrows, and his distrust was aggravated in his heart. Elena took a step forward, her voice so low that she seemed to be complaining about a taboo secret. What you feel in the prison is not wrong. You can sense God's will because your blood is different from everyone else. Kalles, the woman in your dream is Pandora, your ancestor. Kalles shook and looked at her in disbelief. And God and the world don't know that in Pandora's magic box, in addition to the 7 disasters that were released, there is also the 8th one that was quietly hidden by her with her blood. Elena's eyes became unprecedentedly serious, and each word hit Kalles' heart like a heavy stone. It is called a curse, a force that can overturn the order of God and man. Now, it is in your body, about to wake up. Elena's words were like a soundless stone, thrown into the dead lake in Kalles' heart, which stirred up not ripples, but huge waves. Disaster curse. Descendants of Pandora. These words are more imperceptible to a trait slammed on the streets of Athens than the clouds on the top of Mount Olympus. His first reaction was not fear, but anger after being fooled. He laughed, his laughter was dry and short, like 2 stones rubbing. Student, your story is well written. Kalles took a step back and opened the distance from her. This was his habitual defensive posture. Pandora? Has you treated me as the fool of those precious tribes who grew up listening to myths? I only know that my stomach will be slim and the fists of the soldiers are very hard. What do you want to get from me if you save me? Do you want to find a hearing protection, or do you want to sell me to a wealthy businessman who likes male sex? His words were as mean as a knife, and it was his only weapon he had. Elena was not angry at his ruthlessness, her gray eyes were unusually calm in the moonlight, as if she had expected all his reactions. Your distrust is your armor, Kalles, it has kept you alive until today. But this armor makes you unable to see the truth of the world. She did not rush to explain, but changed her way. Don't you recognize it because you are afraid of it? What you are afraid of is not me, not soldiers, but the changes that are happening in your own body. Do you think the emotions and wills you sensed in prison last night were just nightmares? Kalles' pupils suddenly shrank. That was the deepest secret in his heart, a physical experience he had never mentioned to anyone, and this woman revealed it in one sentence. Close your eyes, Kalles. Elena's voice was filled with a strange guiding nature, soft and irresistible. Don't think of me, don't think of yourself. Go listen and listen with your soul. Listen to what this sleeping city is in the whisper. With the strong ring and an uncontrollable curiosity, Kalles hesitated for a moment, and finally closed his eyes. At first, the world was left with only the sound and the barking of the dogs far away. But gradually, an unprecedented perception spreads, clearer than visuals and more real than hearing. He heard it. Across a few streets, a bread maker was worried about his life. His worries were like a gray fog. A wealthy clerk was calculating tomorrow's power deal while sleeping, and his greed appeared as a dark gold color. The soldiers guarding the city, his fatigue and longing for the countryside formed a faint blue light, but his will was deeply moved by a cool divine nature from the war god Ares, a cold and conflict-hungry ape. The lines of emotions and will gather in his brain to form a messy network, and he himself is at the center of this network. He could even feel that if he wanted to, he seemed to be able to gently sway one of the wires. For example, the anxiety of the bread maker made him look absolutely unsightly, or it ignited the violence in the soldier's heart and made him draw his sword against the night patrol teammates passing by. This thought surprised him in a cold sweat, and suddenly opened his eyes, gasping for breath, as if he had just been blown out of the deep water. He looked at Elena in surprise, his lips trembling slightly. This is not an illusion, this is a real and immoral power. A terrible power that can explore and possibly engage people's hearts. See? Elena's spirit remained calm. This is the form of the manipulation. Now, it only makes you perceive. When it fully awakens, you will be able to influence or even revise other people's emotions and destiny. You can turn a stolen priest into a greedy robber, or a heroic warrior into a cowardly coward. This is why it is called the eighth disaster, because it directly threatens to the foundation of order, free will. Why is it me? Kalles' voice was ashamed. He felt the fear in his heart for the first time, which was even more serious than facing hunger and death. Becoming a monster who can play with other people's minds, makes him feel cold. For blood, this is a fate that cannot be chosen. Elena walked up to him, her eyes as sharp as a sword. And the awakening of his power has attracted the attention of Olympus. Not all gods are like me, hoping to guide and control it. Some gods, such as Zeus, see that they must be erased completely. His agent, the cold Argos, are probably already looking for them. Your trace. Once found by him, your next scene is only smoke. She put it on, and her language became more meaningful. There are some gods, such as the cunning Hermes, who see it as an unprecedented power, a code that can be traded and exploited. His messengers, perhaps soon, will come to you, confuse you with sensible words, and turn you into his own tools. Zeus wanted to destroy him, and Hermes wanted to use him. Kalles felt like a piece of meat thrown into a pack of wolves, and the woman who was called Elena in front of him was absolutely not a good person. What about you? Athena's. Kalles did not express the words incarnation, but the deep and sea-like divine wisdom he felt from her had exposed her identity. What do you want? Control me? Turn me into your puppet? I want to protect humans from a new and greater disaster. Elena calmly looked at him. If your power is not controlled, it will be enough to cause a disarray of more than 7 disasters in the moral world. I need you to learn to seize it and limit it to a controllable range. For this reason, we must go to a place, the forbidden land of the Olympus. That is the fate of the mythology era, and mortals have long been unable to set foot on, but there is a knowledge that can unlock your blood secrets and the only place that can let you learn how to coexist with this beast in your body. Olympus Forbidden Area. It's this name again, which is incompatible with the lowly words in his dreams. Kalles fell into a fierce slap. He spent his whole life escaping soldiers, escaping hunger, and escaping all restraints. And now, a larger and heavier shackle, the so-called destiny, is coming towards him. Following this unpredictable woman, she sent her neck into the rope. But if he didn't follow her and stayed in Athens, he would face the pursuit of gods and mortals at the same time, holding this power that he felt terrified. He would have lost control and become his worst monster. Freedom and survival, he discovered for the first time that he could not possess it at the same time. The wisdom of the street told him that when all roads were dead, choose the one that seemed the deepest and unpredictable, because there may be the only variable hidden there. I didn't choose, right? Kalles smiled self-deprecatingly, and the thrust in his eyes was replaced by a cold and hard decision. He raised his head and looked into Elena's eyes. There was no longer the slipperiness of the street gangsters, but the cruelty of a wild beast that was forced into the end. What can I get if I follow you? The opportunity to survive, and the right to know the truth, Elena replied. Okay. Kalles spit out a word and cut the wire. "When do we go?" A true smile finally appeared on the corner of Elena's mouth. "Now." She turned over and walked to the back door of the courtyard, which led to the little one outside the city. Kalles finally looked back at the direction of Athens. The familiar roofs and alleys were as quiet as before under the moonlight, and felt as far away as the hunchback. He knew that from the beginning of stepping out of this courtyard, the orphan Kalles, who had lived by stealing life, had died. The road ahead was covered by heavy night shadows, leading to the unknown divine realm and to the deep impurity of fate that he could not predict. He took a deep breath of cold air, suppressed all the anxiety and confusion in his heart, and opened his pace, followed Elena's figure, and the two disappeared into the darkness outside Athens. After leaving Athens, they walked north along an ancient road reflected in silvery white by the moonlight. Around the surroundings are a quiet olive forest. The night wind blows over the leaves and makes rustling sounds, like countless dead souls in the lowly words. Kalles has never left Athens so far away, and the hustle and bustle of the city is swept behind, replaced by a primitive and disturbing tranquility. He and Elena walked in silence, their steps clearly in the empty night. Kalles always kept a 3-step distance from her, a safe distance that could be used to raid or turn around and escape at any time. Although he chose to cooperate, his trust in this mysterious woman is thinner than the fowl in the wind. "You are very alert." Elena's voice suddenly broke the silence. She didn't turn her head, as if her eyes were growing. "But in the next journey, you need to learn to distinguish enemies. Just worrying about instinctive suspicion will make you difficult. My instinct has allowed me to live on the streets of Athens for 22 years. Kalles responded coldly, "And trust will only make me die faster. You told me that Zeus was going to kill me, Hermes was going to use me. What about you? Athena's incarnation, you said to guide and control me. Where's the boundary line?" "The boundary is your choice." Elena stopped and turned to face him. The moonlight outlined her strict wheel. "I will teach you the knowledge of the mantra, how to perceive it and understand it, but how to use it in the end. Decide your authority. This is the greatest respect I can give you as the god of wisdom. And Zeus, he will only destroy you. Hermes, he will only lock you." Kalles didn't say anything, just stared into her eyes. He tried to use the awakened perception to explore her heart, and found that Elena's emotions were like a deep sea covered by a fog. He could feel the huge will of the gods, calm and majestic, but deeper, blocked by a barrier that he could not penetrate. She clearly knows how to protect her mind. This recognition made Kalles more alert, and this ally was far more powerful and complex than what she showed. They continued to move forward, not stopping for a long time. When the eastern sky turned white and dyed a faint red color, they arrived at a deserted station. Several broken stone pillars and collapsed walls are the buildings that exist here, indicating that this place has long been forgotten by the world. "We're resting here," Elena said, taking out a piece of dry bread and a water bag from her bag and giving it to Kalles. "You need to supplement your energy. From here we will enter the Delphi Mountains, which is the destruction of myths, not only with steep mountain roads, but also with many out-of-control magical creatures from the past." Kalles took the food and swallowed it without any politely. Last night's running around made him rush, and his fatigue suddenly blew the suspicion in his heart. He leaned against a huge rock, gnawing on the dry and hard bread, and looking around. The shimmer of morning light dissipated the fear of the night, but it also made the surrounding wilderness even more intimate. This land is filled with a decay, which is completely different from the vitality of Athens. He could feel some chaotic emotional fragments wandering in the air, the desire of soldiers on ancient war scenes, the fear of lost travelers, and some inhuman and strange manic thoughts. At this moment, a quick sound of footsteps came from afar, accompanied by a faint whistle. Kalles immediately became alert, stuffed the remaining bread into it, and his body tightened, like a cat ready to slap. Elena also stood up, her eyes turning to the direction of the sound, and her eyes became solemn. A young man walked out of the morning fog, wearing a fitted traveler robe and a pair of winged shoes on his feet, the logo of the god messenger Hermes. He looked about 27 or 8 years old, with a handsome face, a cynical smile on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were as cunning as a fox. He was playing with a gold coin in his hand, which jumped flexibly between him, as if it was alive. "Oh, isn't this the wise Miss Elena? What a coincidence, I didn't expect to meet you in this wilderness." The man bowed frivolously, and his eyes turned on Kalles, with unconcealed evaluation and greed. "I guess this is the young man who has become famous recently in Athens. Pandora's servant is really not as good as seeing all the news. Tellin'." Elena's voice turned cold. "Hermes' lackey, your nose is still so spiritual. But let me put away your little cleverness, there is no deal you want here." The man called Terran smiled and didn't care about Elena's enemies. "Don't say that, Elena. The deal is the divine duty of Lord Hermes, the slipper that revolves around the world. Look, the one on Mount Olympus," he whispered into the sky, with a sarcasm in his voice. "The king of gods only knows how to solve problems with thunder, which is rough and boring. And my master prefers to use more elegant ways. Cooperate and win together." He turned to Kalles, the smile on his face became even more polite and confusing. "Kalles, right? I heard about you. The power that was chosen by fate and was regarded as a dangerous product that needs to be guided and controlled. How unfair." Terran approached a few steps, without seeing Kalles' tight fist. "The power itself is not evil, the key is how to use it. Leave it to Athena, she will add a layered shackle to you, making you a puppet who conforms to what she calls order. And Zeus, he just wants to turn you into a slaughter." He stopped in front of Kalles and opened his hand, the gold coins lay quietly in his palm. "But we can do a deal. Lord Hermes appreciates your potential, he is willing to protect you and teach you how to truly release the power within you. Imagine, Kalles, you will no longer be the bullying street solitary, you will have wealth, status, power, you will be able to write the fate of those who once looked down on you. What you need to pay is just a few small things for my master in the future. This is much more cost-effective than following this lady to venture into a forbidden territory, isn't it?" Terran's voice was full of magic, and every word was accurately struck at the most vulnerable part of Kalles' heart. To lose his sleepiness, to report the past, to live as he pleases, this is a collection of all his dreams in the past 22 years. He could feel the strong inspiration of the soul in Talen's words, a golden, flash-shining will, trying to wrap him and inspire him. Kalles' heart was shaking. He looked at Elena, she just looked at him quietly, without making any move, and seemed to have really handed over the choice to him. He looked at Terran again, and his handsome face was filled with expectations and confidence, as if he had already settled down. The law of survival on the street has come to mind again. When someone gives you a proposal that is so good that it is not like it, it is usually a trap. Hermes' protection sounds beautiful, but the price of doing a few small things is probably to sell his soul to the devil. What is the essence of becoming a tool of God, whether it is Athena's puppet or Hermes' knife? Kalles took a deep breath and used the skills he had just learned to calm his mind down and resist the confusion in Talen's words. He raised his head and looked at Terran, his eyes regaining the cold chili. "Your proposal sounds very intimate." Kalles opened his mouth quietly, his voice calmly surprised Terran. "But I never trade with people who are more cunning than me. Because I never know what I really give." The smile on Terran's face froze, and immediately returned to his cynical look. "Oh? What a pity. It seems that Athena's teachings are more useful than I thought." He snatched his shoulders and put away the gold coins. "It's okay, my proposal will always be effective. When you find that the so-called guidance is just another form of imprisonment, you can come to me any time. Hermes' messenger is everywhere in every corner of the world." After he finished speaking, he blinked at Elena, turned around and merged into the morning fog again. The light whistle went far away, as if he had never appeared. Until Terran's breath completely disappeared, Elena opened her mouth, with a difficult-to-see praise in her speech. "You made the right choice." The freedom that Terran described as a icing coat wrapped in poisonous medicine. "I didn't refuse him for you," Kalles said coldly, leaning back on the stone. "I just chose a road that doesn't look so dying. Don't be too excited, learners. I still don't trust you." Elena did not respond, but said lightly, "Let's go, we have been delaying for too long. Argos's dog is much more sensitive than Hermes' messenger." Kalles stood up and patted the dust on his body. The short conversation with Talon made him clearly realize for the first time that he had been thrown into a game between gods. He is no longer just a runaway man, he is a chess piece, a key piece that all players want to catch. And the only thing he can do is to become the one who can overturn the chessboard before being eaten. He followed Elena's steps and walked towards the depths of the Delphi Mountains. The mountain in front was majestic and steep in the morning light, like a crawling giant, waiting for their arrival. After entering the Delphi Mountains, the flat ancient road disappeared, replaced by a rough mountain road. The air became thin and cold, the ancient pine and cypress replaced the gentle olive trees, and huge rocks stood on both sides of the road like silent giants, casting large shadows. The atmosphere here is completely different from outside the mountain, and it is filled with an ancient, deserted and full of enemies. Kalles could clearly feel that the divine power left on this land was 100 times more scattered than in Athens, but it was also more chaotic and dangerous. They are like abandoned wild animals, traveling unconsciously among the mountains and forests, and they are malicious about any intrusive spirit. They stopped in front of a rock-blocked island. Elena stared at the front with a serious expression. "Be careful, Kalles. This is the edge of the ancient war scene, and it is said that Apollo fought with the giant python skin. Although the myth has ended, the resentment of Python and the power of divine power have spawned something not so friendly here." Kalles looked at her eyes and saw only the depth of the shadows of the valley, several seemingly ordinary rocks creeping in a very slow and contrary to the common sense of physics. Their appearance resembles a huge rock, with a layer of moss and soil covering the surface, which is so slim that it is so tidy. He would not have known that they were living creatures unless he had not captured the slight will of those things that were purely composed of fertility and maliciousness. "What is that?" he asked in a low voice. "The descendants of the rock python, the creature of skin and resentment," Elena replied. "They have no wisdom, they only have the instinct to swallow flesh and blood. Their skin is as hard as iron, and they often cannot be damaged by swords. We have to go through it. However, it is already too annoying." The moment they entered this area, they were already amazed by these potential predators. One of the rocks suddenly popped up from the ground, revealing its true face. It was a giant python made of rock and soil, without eyes, only a huge mouth made of gravel that could be opened infinitely. It roared heavily and rushed towards the two people, its speed completely inconsistent with its large body shape. "Go away!" Elena shouted softly and pulled Kalles toward the mountain wall beside her. The rock pythons thrust into the sky, hitting hard where they were just standing, and a deafening huge shaking in gravel was quarrying. Then, the other rock pythons in the valley woke up. For a while, the entire valley was alive, and 7 or 8 huge rocks surrounded them from all directions, blocking all retreats. Kalles' heart sank to the bottom. He is just a slap, and his experience in fighting is limited to street fights. Facing this supernatural monster, he has no iron in his hand, and his only weapon is his instinct to escape. But now, they have no way to escape. "Fight me!" Elena's voice was terrifyingly cold. She took out a short ivory staff carved with complex patterns from her bag. She chanted an ancient spell and a soft silver ray of light appeared on the top of her staff. The light spread forward, forming a translucent barrier that barely slammed the tail-swinging attack of a rock python. The barrier drama shook violently, and the sound of glass shattering was heard, which obviously could not be supported for too long. "This won't work!" Kalles roared, and he saw another rock python circling from the side, ready to launch an attack. "There are too many of them." "I know." Elena gritted her teeth, maintained the barrier, and her small sweat came out of her head. "My divine power is extremely limited in mortals, and I cannot directly use divine power to destroy them. I can only delay time. You need to think of a way, Kalles. Use your power." "My power?" Kalles was stunned. "What can I do? Will they feel sad and kill themselves?" His words were filled with hope and self-deprecating. His power of curse can only perceive and influence emotions. What can it do with these monsters without mind and instinct? No. You're wrong. Elena's voice became anxious. Everything has will, even the most primitive instincts. Their will is fed and attack, which is the root of their actions. Your power is not only to create sorrow, but to influence will. Try to interfere with them and distort their instincts. Let their attack targets get mixed up. Carl's heart jumped wildly. Twisted instinct? This is a field he has never imagined. He looked at the monsters roaring and ramming the barrier in front of him, and the threat of death flooded him like a cold tide. In the midst of fear, a desire to survive ignited like a flame. He didn't want to die here, he didn't want to become the monster's food in such an unknown way. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to not see the great shock and vibration around him, and sink his entire mind into the strange world of perception. The uninterrupted will rush in his brain, but he quickly distinguished the wills of the rock pythons, pure and unconfused ape-red lines, each pointing to him and Elena, representing the most direct desire to attack. He tried to swallow these lines, just like Elena said. At first, when his mental power touched those violent wills, it was like a feather hitting a running bison, and was easily opened. A dramatic backlash made his head burst into pain, and warm blood flowed out of his nostrils. Concentrate, Kalles. Elena's voice sounded in his ears, trembling with a slight trembling. Obviously her barrier was almost limiting. Don't try to fight against each other, to guide you. Soak in like a stream of water and find the weakest point in their will. Kalles bit his teeth tightly and endured the pain and tried again. This time, he no longer fought head-on, but turned his will into an invisible stream, carefully exploring along one of the red will lines of the ape. He could feel the original impulse of the rock python, the pure desire to crush everything in front of him. He flowed through this desire, not fighting against it, but looking for a gap that could exert influence. He found it. In the will of one of the slightly smaller rock pythons, in addition to the desire to attack, there was also a piece of frighten to the larger rock python next to it. This is an instinct derived from biological pressure. That's it. Kalles seized this opportunity and injected all his mental power into the silk fear. Instead of creating new emotions, he magnifies this existing emotions infinitely. He imagined the fear of the small rock python, imagined that it regarded its companions as greater threat than itself, and imagined that its target of attack had deviated. The next second, an incredible scene happened in the real world. The small rock python was about to hit the barrier, but suddenly turned around and opened a huge mouth made of gravel, biting hard at the same type with the largest shape on its body. The attacked giant rock python roared angrily. It did not expect it to be stolen by its companions. It instinctively turned around and swept the small rock python out, hitting heavily on the stone wall of the island valley, and falling into gravel. This sudden sister-in-law made the attack rhythm of the entire rock python group a blow. Their original will, for the first time, was confusion and hesitation. It's successful. Elena's voice was filled with surprise and exhaustion. Kalles' face was as white as paper, and his body was shaking, but there was an unprecedented light in his eyes. He succeeded. He used his strength to change the battle. The shock brought by this recognition is far beyond the weakness of the body. He held his spirit strongly, spread his perception again, and locked another rock python. This time, he no longer just amplifies his fear, but directly distorts its attack command. He pointed the line of ape red will to theirs, and executed bang, pointing to another rock python near it. Another battle broke out. In the valley, the rock pythons began to attack each other wildly. Their original instincts were crippled by Kalles, and they regarded each other as the only enemies. The sound of slamming and roaring sounds never ended in my ears, and the body made of huge stones kept cracking and shattering under the mutual destruction. Elena took the opportunity to remove the barrier that was about to collapse and held Kalles, who was about to faint. Go away. The two of them stopped stopping and took advantage of the chaos of the monsters killing each other and quickly passed through the valley. Behind him, the last rock python turned into a pile of lifeless gravel under the same sphere. The valley was silent again, leaving only a mess and a faint burnt smell in the air. They escaped very far before stopping in a valley with wind. Kalles sat on the ground, gasping for breath. His body was wet with sweat, and there seemed to be 1,000 pinches piercing his brain. This was his first time actively and vigorously using the power of the curse, and the overdrawing of the spirit was more terrifying than the consumption of physical strength. Elena passed the water bag and looked at him with unusual complexity, both with relief and deeper worries and rings. "You did a great job, Kalles. You're more talented than I thought." Kalles drank a few saliva and came slightly. He looked at his hands, as if there was still a touch of distorting the monster's will on it. He was not happy about escaping from birth, but instead a deeper chill broke out in his heart. Just now, at the moment when the will of the rock python was twisted, he felt an unprecedented pleasure. It was a godlike pleasure that dominated his life. This discovery made him feel incomparable fear. What he was afraid of was not the power of this force, but that he would indulge in this power, eventually losing himself and becoming a real monster. He raised his head and looked at Elena, and asked with a sound of sha-sha, "Is this the true face of the curse?" Elena was silent for a moment before she became calm. "This is just a part of it. What you do today is interference. And the real terrible thing about it is creation and rewrite. This is also the reason why we have to go to the Olympus forbidden territory. You have to learn to plan your power, otherwise, one day you will be swallowed by it." Kalles clamped his fist tightly, his nails sank deep into his palms. He raised his head toward the steep mountain that was remotely connected, where there was clouds and clouds, unable to see as much as his fate was now. He knew that what he wanted to fight on this journey was not only the pursuit of the gods and the disasters of the journey, but also the devil who was ready to move after just savoring the taste of power. After passing through the Rock Python Valley, the next few days of journey became more and more difficult. The landforms of the Delphi Mountains are complex and changeable. Sometimes they are steep cliffs and sometimes they are deep forests. The mythical storm that surrounds the air is becoming more and more depressed. Kalles can often sense some broken and strong emotions from the past: the joy of the goddess hunting, the pleasure of the fairies playing in the mountains and forests, or the unsatisfactory resentment left by the giants who were punished by God. These emotional fragments travel in the mountains like ghosts, a fatal trap for ordinary travelers, but for Kalles, they have become the best training ground. Under Elena's guidance, he learned how to distinguish the source of these emotions, how to block their interference, and even tried to calm down the most violent resentment, so that they could calm down and open a safe path for them. This process was a huge test of his spirit. "Every time I contact the ancient will, it is like dancing on the tip of a knife." He must guide carefully, not be assimilated by it. There were several times when he was almost lost in the self-concern of a fairy, and was filled with the reflection of the stream. Once, he was almost swallowed by a titanic anger and wanted to shatter the mountain in front of him. Every time this time, Elena would wake him up with her cold and clear divine will, like a basin of cold water on his burning soul. "Remember, Kalles." After a little out of control, Elena told him seriously, "Your power comes from empathy, but you must not indulge in empathy. You are their masters, not their containers. Once you start to enjoy their emotions, you are no longer yourself." Kalles was silently placed, and his heart became more and more painful. He felt like a person walking on a steel wire. One side was deep and the other side was deep. Without using power, they cannot deal with dangers on the journey, and when using power, he always faces the risk of being invaded by power. His relationship with Elena has also become more subtle. He relied on her knowledge and guidance, but at the same time he felt more and more jealous of her profound and unpredictable power. She was like a perfect beast master, always able to hold the roam just right around his out of control, which made him wonder whether what she called guidance was really just turning him into the way she wanted. At dusk, they came to a lake surrounded by mountains. The lake water is as clear as a mirror, reflecting the sunset glow in the sky, and the scenery is breathtakingly beautiful. But under this beauty, there is a strong and disturbing divine atmosphere. There is a small island in the center of the lake, on which is a broken divine temple. Even from this distance, Kalles could feel that the divine temple is the gathering point of all the powers in the entire region. We'll be here tonight, Elena said, pointing to a relatively flat grassy area around the lake. Tomorrow morning, we'll have to cross this lake and reach the sleeping god's hall opposite. Through there, we're not far from the outskirts of the Olympus. There is a problem in this lake. Kalles stared at the calm and waveless lake surface. His perception told him that something was lurking in the depths of the lake. It was a will mixed with sorrow, confusion and thirst, like a soundless demon song, constantly squeezing his heartstrings. This is the Low of Forget, where the descendants of the goddess Nymphu, the goddess of water, live in it. Elena explained. They inherited the beauty and singing voice of their ancestors, and also inherited the resentment of being abandoned. Their singing can confuse people's minds and lure travelers into the lake and become their feed. No ship can drive to the opposite shore. Then how did we get through? Kalles asked. Use your power. Elena's answer was simple and straightforward. Their singing is essentially an emotional attack. Only your power of spells can compete with it. What you need to do is not to fight them, but to let them open a way for you. As night falls, the moon rises into the sky, and the silver moonlight shines on the lake, rippling waves. Kalles and Elena formed a bonfire, and the flames crackled, dispersing the chill of the forest. Just as everything was silent, a song of singing came from the direction of the island in the middle of the lake. The song was wonderful and radiant, not like the ordinary sound, full of strange magic. It is like the lover's whisper, and it is like the mother's cry, arousing the deepest desires and regrets in a person's heart. Kalles felt that his mental defense was being disintegrated a little, and the past scenes that he had deliberately forgotten were uncontrollably flooded, the luxury of warmth in childhood, the desire for partners in youth, and the admiration for a normal life. He even had a strong impulse, wanting to walk into the clean lake, hug the singing master, and seek eternal comfort. Still your mind, Kalles. Elena's humble shout was like a heavy note, and she woke him up. Kalles bit his tongue suddenly, and the pain made him recover. He was in a cold sweat, and just now he almost stood up and walked towards the lake. He looked at Elena and found that although her face was solemn, her eyes were still clear. It was obvious that this song had limited influence on her, who was Athena's incarnation. This is their power. Kalles murmured, feeling thirsty. It's time to you now. Elena looked at him, feel their will and understand their sorrows. Don't fight with violence, use your empathy to communicate with them. Let them understand that you are not an enemy, but a traveler who wants to borrow. Kalles took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Once again he sank himself into that world composed of will and emotion. This time, what he had to face was no longer pure maliciousness of the rock python, but a much more complex emotional collection. He spread his perceptions like a net to the island in the middle of the lake, and soon touched the will of the Shwezi goddesses. It was a sea of deep blue tragedy. Under the wonderful cloak of singing, there are loneliness that has grown into several centuries, abandoned resentment, and jealousy that has developed spirits to the outside world. They confuse travelers not only to fill their stomachs, but also to report, and to drag others into their eternal loneliness. Instead of directly responding, Kalles carefully passed on his own emotions. It is not a confrontation, but an equal question without any offensiveness. He put himself in the lonely sense of being alone, and he thrust himself in the streets of Athens to the sad ocean. The singing sounds instantly. The goddesses of water Shwe were obviously surprised by this sudden common bird. In their long lives, all the intruders must be bewildered viseras, and the enemy who attempts to conquer them by force. No one ever tried to understand their pain. Kalles seized the opportunity. He no longer suppressed his past, but instead transformed the most painful and lonely memories into pure emotional signals through the power of the curse. He showed his trembling feeling in the cold night, the humiliation of being chased and spitted, and the hope that the world only has him. This time, he is not influencing or distorting, but sharing. The singing in the middle of the lake has finally changed. The originally tempting melody became so sad and purplish, as if in harmony with Kalles' pain. There will no longer be full of offensiveness, but instead a complex, mixed sympathy and curiosity arises. They seem to be asking, "Who are you? Why are you so similar to us?" Instead of answering in language, Kalles continued to communicate with emotion. He conveyed the purpose of his trip not to conquer or plunder, but to go through here and find an answer about his life experience, a possibility of losing his miserable life. The singing on the lake gradually calmed down. The disturbing temptation that covered the island in the middle of the lake also dissipated. After a while, circles of ripples appeared on the lake surface, a small piece of water and duckweed that only one person passed through, extending from the shore to the divine temple on the island in the middle of the lake. Elena's eyes were filled with a slight surprise. She expected that Kalles could use his strength to fight the singing, but she did not expect that he could do this, allowing the goddess Shueisha to open her way for him willingly. This has exceeded the scope of interference and has reached a higher level of common birds. Kalles opened his eyes quietly, and his face was pale, but his eyes were unusually bright. This time, he did not feel the pain of being retaliated against by power, nor the pleasure of being the dangerous and thrilling that dominates others. Instead, it is an unprecedented tranquility. He discovered that the power of the curse can not only be used for fighting and manipulation, but also for understanding and communication. This path of grief and empathy gave him a new understanding of his power. "It seems that you have found the third way to relate to your power." Elena's voice was filled with emotion. Kalles stood up and looked at the little shining light leading to the unknown. "Let's go." "It seems they agree that we borrowed it." He took the lead in stepping on that little piece of water, and the water plants under his feet were unusually realistic. Elena was forced to do so later. The two walked on the road made of the goddess of water, and the surroundings were the silent lake water as if shining on them, as if seeing off the two lonely travelers. Kalles knew that he was getting closer and closer to the Olympus forbidden territory, and the ultimate secret about Pandora and the eighth death were getting closer and closer. But at this moment, the fear in his heart was replaced by a strange calm. He began to understand, or perhaps the key to driving this force was not about pressure or release, but about understanding. It's not just understanding others, but also understanding yourself. After stepping onto the little light, the surrounding lake water was as quiet as black crystal, reflecting the moon and stars in the sky. The singing of the goddess Shueisha has completely disappeared, and replaced by a strange calm, as if the entire lake is holding their breath for them. Kalles walked in front and could feel the curiosity coming from underwater without any enemies. They were like a group of timid children, observing the stranger who could understand their tragedy in secret. Although this kindness is fragile, it is real. Shaozi's head is the broken sleeping divine temple on the island in the middle of the lake. The gods were built of white marble, but the invasion of the old months made it full of devastation. Stone pillars were piled up, the roof collapsed, and the walls were covered with smooth moss and vines. A divine breath that was more sturdy than I felt in the lake before was revealed from the depths of the divine world, ancient, majestic, and also a sleepy loneliness. The two walked onto the island, and the little light under their feet quietly hid behind them, shattering their way out. Kalles looked back at the calm lake and knew in his heart that they had no way back. Who is this god's worship? It's the sleeping god Chopinos. Elena's voice was very low, with awe. In the age of mythology, this is the holy land where mortals pray for peace to him. But as the gods retreated, Sepulus fell into an eternal sleep. His divine power evaporated, turning this divine temple into a huge dream mystery. Those who step into it will be pulled into their own soul, facing the deepest fear and the most obsessive desires. If they cannot get out, the soul will be trapped in the dream forever, and the flesh will be transformed into dust here. Kalles' eyebrows were tightly raised. It is another form of examination, and it is an examination that faces the inner heart. This is more fierce than fighting against the real monster. Is there no other way to go? No. Elena shook her head. This island is the last barrier before entering the Olympus forbidden territory, and it is also a filter. Only those who can look up to their hearts are qualified to enter the realm of God. Zeus kept it to stop all uninvited guests. She looked at it towards Kalles. His eyes were particularly serious. To you, this place is particularly dangerous. The power of your mantra will make what you see in the dream more real and easier to be swallowed by it. Remember, no matter what you see, you must keep your heart. Everything there is delusion. Kalles took a deep breath and clenched his fist. He knew he had no choice. He followed Elena and walked step by step into the shadow of the gods. As soon as you step into the divine hall, the surrounding scenery was twisted and illusory. The previous second was the broken stone pillars and the collapsed walls, and the next second, he realized that he was standing alone in a familiar, dirty alley in Athens. The air was filled with the smell of garbage and sewage. He had become erotic from his fiction, and the noise of the market was spread far away. Elena disappeared, and the island in the middle of the lake also disappeared, as if everything before was just a dream. He felt amazement and immediately realized that he had fallen into the dream realm of the sleeping god cultivation Pinos. He tried to use his perception to find Elena, and found that his power was greatly suppressed here, and he could only vaguely feel the surroundings filled with a drowsy, powerful divine will. "Kalles! You thief!" A rough voice rose behind him. He returned to his head and saw a burly soldier approaching him, the leader who had hunted him countless times. He turned around and ran away subconsciously, and his instinct drove him into the miserable alley. Chasing, hiding, being discovered, running away again. This is the code he has repeated countless times in the past 22 years. Tiredness and fear flowed like a tide, and he felt that he had become the weak and helpless street loner again, and could only survive under the storm of others. Just as he was about to be caught, he suddenly stopped. "No!" Elena said that all this is false. This is a dream, a projection of his inner fear. He can no longer run away like he used to. He turned around and no longer avoided, but faced the evil soldier. The soldier's fist wrapped around and called him with a voice. Instead of hiding, he closed his eyes and focused his whole mind on his will. "You are fake," he said to himself in his heart. "You are just my incarnation of fear." The expected drama pain has not been transmitted. He opened his eyes quietly and found that the soldier's fist was stuck in front of his nose, making it difficult to move forward. A confused expression appeared on Hubing's face, and then his body began to dissipate like a smoke, and finally turned into Yu. The alleys around also collapsed and turned into nothingness. Kalles gasped and he succeeded. He fought his fear of being chased. However, the exam has not ended. The scene changed again and he discovered a beautiful banquet hall where he was. The lights and fires in the hall were bright, and the nobles were wearing nor ale, with their goblets and laughing. And he himself sat in the main seat, wearing a Chinese suit that all the kings of the nation were jealous of, and countless beauties were surrounded by lovely eyes at him. The table was filled with delicacies and the gold and silver treasures were piled up like mountains. Hermes' messenger Telon appeared beside him, with that familiar, confusing smile on his face. "Look, Kalles, this is the world I promise you. Wealth, power, beauty, there should be as much. You are no longer the orphan who is spitted, you are the master of the world. As long as you point your head, everything is yours. All you need to do is release the power within you and use it as you wish. This time the envy is more deadly than the previous fears. This is the concreteness of his deep desires. Who doesn't want to get tired of it? Who doesn't want to be respected?" He looked at the lust in front of him, and his throat couldn't help but feel a little thirsty. At this moment, he felt that the power of the curse in his body was ready to move, and had a strong communion with the feelings of the rich tribes around him, their flattery, their jealousy, and their greed. He even had an urge to manipulate them and let them play a more absurd code for themselves, making them kneel under their feet like dogs. This thought made him feel cold and he woke up in an instant. He remembered the dangerous pleasure that dominated the life and death of others when he was in the Rock Python Valley. If he accepted everything in front of him, he would indulge in this pleasure, lose himself in the end, and become a tyrant who is more terrible than Zeus and Hermes. This is not the freedom he wants, it is another form of imprisonment, imprisoned by his own desires. "Roll up," Kalles said coldly to Tyrant's phantom. "Are you sure?" Tyrant's phantom smiled even more. "Are you really willing to go back to that past without any? Think about those who have bullied you, don't you want to report it? Think about the noble tribes you look down on, don't you want to step on them under your feet? I think. Kalles admitted frankly that his voice was not loud, and he was very sure. But not in this way. I want to use my own will to fight for what I want, rather than be a slave to power. He stood up and no longer looked at the thriving scene in front of him, but turned toward the door of the banquet hall. Every step you take, the luxurious scene behind you is broken. When he walked to the door, the entire banquet hall was shattered like a glass, turning into a bubble. He fought against himself again. This time, it was the desire in the heart. As the darkness faded, he found himself standing in the center of the temple of the gods. Elena was far away, her face was a little pale, and it seemed that she had also experienced her dream experience. At the very end of the hall is a huge sleeping statue of the god of sleep, the sleeping god cultivate Punos. The statue scattered a peaceful and lazy atmosphere, as if they were not concerned about these intruders. It seems you've come out. Elena's voice was filled with relief. Same for you, Kalles replied, looking at Elena. What did you see in your dream? Elena's eyes flashed for a moment, avoiding his gaze, and just said lightly, some unpleasant memories about the past are scattered. No need. Kalles didn't ask, but he felt sensitively that Elena was telling her. At that moment, her emotions showed a slight fluctuation, which was a mixed feeling of sorrow, regret and fear. Although it was fleeting, he caught it. This discovery made him feel moved. It turned out that this noble incarnation of the goddess of wisdom also had his own inner demons and weaknesses. At this moment, a cold and heartless and full of murderous will was like a sacrificial sword that quenched ice, suddenly stabbing from behind the gods. This will is so strong that it exceeds any danger they have encountered before. It has no emotion, only one pure gold destruction. He's here. Elena's face changed. In the shadow of the back hall of the gods, a tall figure walked out slowly. He wore a black armor made of Olympus Santa gold, whose helmet completely covered his face, revealing only a pair of emotionally unconscious eyes that were flashing against the cold. He held a huge battle axe in his hand, and the thunderous power flowed from the axe blade. Every step he took, the entire divine hall was shocked. He is Zeus's agent and the guardian of the Olympus's forbidden territory, Argos. The pressure emitted from his body made Kalles almost unable to breathe. It is an unquestionable trial from the highest authority of the gods. Pandora's people. Argos' voice came from under his helmet, as cold as metal rubbing. Your journey ends here. The eighth disaster will be erased forever by the order of Zeus, the king of God. Before he finished speaking, the thunder axe in his hand had already been lifted and locked up Kalles. The breath of destruction came over, without any reversal. The moment Argos lifted his battle axe, the entire sleeping divine air seemed to be drained. The thunder power jumping on the axe blade burst out with a sizzling explosion, reflecting his tall figure like a judge from the underworld. The pure will that exists for the sake of destruction is like countless cold-pointed snails, piercing every inch of Kalles' skin, making him unable to move. In the face of Zeus's absolute power over divine power, he just established confidence and control of power, which seemed so insignificant. Retreat, Kalles. Elena's voice broke the silence. She stomped in front of Kalles with a quick step. The ivory staff in her hand burst out with unprecedented bright silver light, forming a barrier of wisdom composed of countless ancient runes in front of the two. Her divine will, which belonged to Athena, was released for the first time without reservation, like an indestructible mountain facing the murder of Argos' destruction of heaven and earth. Athena's incarnation. Argos' voice was not as slim as if Elena's appearance had long been expected. Do you want to resist the will of Lord Zeus? Covering up this evil of disaster will only bring greater chaos to people. Let it open, Elena, this is not a fight you should intervene. I never resist the true will of God, Argos, I follow the guidance of wisdom. Elena's voice was calm and powerful. The power in this child's body has not yet been determined. He may become a disaster or a change. It is the stupidest way to erase it roughly. Zeus's fear should not determine the end of a life. Afraid of fear? The king of gods is never afraid of fear. Argos snorted coldly, with his absolute loyalty and passion in his language. He only maintains order. And this eighth disaster itself is the greatest conscience of order. Since you are unwilling to open it, then you will be cleansed together. Before he finished speaking, the thunder battle axe in his hand had already slashed down with thousands of chariots. It is not an attack that ordinary people can understand, but a scattered and pure destruction. The air was torn apart, and the entire ground of the divine temple was shaking violently. Rush! The thunder axe slashed hard on the wisdom barrier, emitting a dazzling light, making Kalles blind in an instant. The huge impact wave suddenly dissipated with the collision point, shaking the broken stone pillars and walls around it into powder. Kalles was blown away by the wave of power, and hit hard on the base of the statue far away. His throat sweetened and a mouthful of blood was sprayed. He lifted his head and saw Elena still trying to help. The barrier made of runes is covered with spider net-like cracks, which may collapse at any time. Elena's face was as white as paper, and a bloody spike appeared on the corner of her mouth. Obviously, even as the incarnation of the gods, she is far from being a rival to Zeus's loyal guardian Argos in the face of power. Every move by Argos contains the authority of the Lord God Olympus. It's useless. Athena's wisdom is in the face of absolute power, but it is a fragile spider network. Argos opened his heavy steps and approached step by step. The axe in his hand once again condensed the lightning of the enemy. Give up, Elena. Your mission is to protect Athens, not this monster. Kalles looked at the scene in front of him and felt a strong sense of powerlessness and anger poured into his heart. He hated his weakness and could only hide behind a woman, watching her bleeding for him with eyes silence. He hated Argos' unquestioned judgment, and Zeus's so-called order. What fate must be decided by these gods who have never really cared about the suffering of mortals? What is the crime of disaster when he is born? No. He pulled a word out from his teeth and tried to stand up. At this moment, a frivolous voice echoed from another corner of the god of war, carrying a happy and joyful verbal tutor. Oh, it's such a big show. Thunder, wisdom, and a little mouse that's about to be scared. It seems that I'm coming at the right time. Teirin. Hermes' messenger appeared at the top of a half-collapsed stone pillar. He was always cynical, but his eyes were filled with unprecedented excitement and greed. He looked at the confrontation in the field as if he was enjoying a wonderful horn fight. Tellin. Argos stopped and turned his cold eyes to him. Do you want to get a share of Hermes' fortune? Get a share? No, I'm not interested in participating in the fight with you wild people. Teirin smiled and rolled down from the stone pillar, landing on the ground with a clever look. My master Hermes advocates transactions and mobility. And the Pandora's genius in front of him, he pointed to Kalles, is an unpriced commodity, a quirky piece of goods that can change the power pattern of the god realm. Isn't this wasteful thing to be smashed by your stone? What do you want to do? Elena asked, keeping the barrier, staring vigilantly at the sudden change. It's very simple. Teirin pointed, and the smile on his face became strange. I don't want him to die, nor do I want him to be protected by you. I just want to let him belong to me. As the voice fell, Teirin's figure suddenly became blurred and turned into a golden stream of light, which was so fast that it exceeded the limit of the naked eye's capture. His goal is not Argos and Elena who are confronting each other, but Kalles who are lying on the ground. His calculations were very good. He wanted to take advantage of the gap between the two sides to rob the weak Kalles. In this way, he can occupy the power of this eighth disaster alone. Don't think about it. Elena and Argos reacted almost at the same time. Elena suddenly removed the barrier, turned and pointed the staff at Teirin. A silver-colored chain appeared, trying to tie him up. Argos was even more direct. He roared angrily, and the thunder war axe in his hand rushed out, turning into a flash, chasing Teirin's back at a faster speed. For a moment, three forces from different gods in the divine body intertwined together, forming a chaotic force field. Elena's wisdom chain, Argos' thunder magic, and Teirin's speed like a storm, all three of them control each other, and no one can succeed in the first time. And Kalles, who was in the center of the storm, entered a strange state at this moment. The external aggression became slow and blurred in his eyes, and he could clearly sense the collision of three divine wills. Elena's will is the silver color of the will, with a guardian and restrained determination. Argo's will is the golden thunder that destroys nature, cold and pure, while Terran's will is the cunning and flowing gold color, full of desire and projection. They were all fighting for him, and no one cared about his real thoughts. He is an object, a threat, a code, but he is not a person. This humiliation and anger were like a barrel of tincture, slapped on the flame called the curse deep in his heart. He remembered the helplessness of being chased and beaten on the streets of Athens, the fear and pleasure of killing people for the first time in Rock Python Valley, and the determination to fight for the inner demon in a dream. All emotions gathered into a torrent at this moment, shaking the dam of his soul. Why are you trying to get me slapped? What should you write my fate in your book? A violent thought grew in his brain. If it was a chess piece, then I would rather be the one to overturn the entire chessboard. Ah! Kalles let out a roar that was not human. A dark force that was so big that it could not be imagined exploded from his body. It is not a pure emotion, but a more original force that is sufficient to distort the actual law. The core of the entire sleeping divine sorrow, the divine will of the sleeping god, which had been sleeping for thousands of years, was roughly awakened by this force, and was twisted and polluted by force. The originally peaceful and lazy sleepiness instantly turned into the deepest and most chaotic nightmare. The invisible impact wave spreads with Kalles as the center. Elena, Argos, and Tyran, the three messengers of God, felt that their minds were hit harder than ever before. In front of them is no longer a god, but a scene where the deepest part of their hearts is infinitely magnified. Elena saw a burning city of Athens, transformed into ruins. Many mortals died in wail. She could only watch as everything she guarded turned into dust. Argos saw the collapse of the holy land of Olympus. Zeus's thunder was extinguished, the order and authority he had allegiance to remained silent in the chaos, and his faith collapsed in an instant. Terran saw that he was overwhelmed by countless gold and treasures, and the things he had pursued throughout his life eventually turned into the tomb that killed him alive, and his greed turned into the deadliest prison. All three of them fell into an inexorable spiritual slaughter made by the power of the Kalles spell. The weapons and power in their hands were out of control in an instant, and the divine power in the divine hall became in chaos. Kalles stood up staggeringly. His eyes were pitch black, without pupils, only deep and invisible whirlpools. The black breath kept overflowing from his body, and wherever he went, all the light was swallowed. He looked at the three people who were in pain and were slapped in pain, without any expression on his face. For the first time, he truly released the eighth disaster, the curse of evil. He is no longer the passive inheritor, but he actively embraced this power that could overturn the order of God and man. He fought against all the wills from Olympus with his own will. This battle in the sleeping god's demon has transformed from the god's judgment on him into his opposition to God. Kalles stood in the center of the nightmare created by himself, and his dark eyes reflected the painful figures of the three messengers of God. The power of the curse ran and roared in his body, like a vicious beast that had swept away the 1,000-year shackle, giving him an unprecedented sense of power and tearing his humanity at the same time. He could feel his consciousness was fusing with an older and more chaotic will, from the deepest point of Pandora's bloodline, the primitive hatred of the divine order. He walked towards Argos, who was still fighting against the demon. Zeus's agent was kneeling on both knees at the moment, his eyes under his helmet were tightly closed, and his body was shaking violently. The scene of the collapse of Olympus he saw was a more terrible punishment than death, for his guardian of his faith and order and authority. Kalles stretched out his hand, and a group of dark black energy condensed in his palm. This energy is not a physical attack, but a pure force of will distortion. He could easily slap Argo's fragile mental defense at this moment, allowing him to remain calm and pervert in the nightmare of faith collapse, becoming a snail or a shell without a soul. Kill him to death and report his indiscriminate judgment. This thought was full of inspiration. However, just as he was about to take action, he flashed through his brain the back of Elena before him, in her words Zeus's fear should not determine the end of a life. Is it hard to decide the end of another life? If he did this, what was the difference between him and Zeus, who was above and willingly sentenced him to death? This thought was like a faint starlight, breaking the darkness in his heart that was occupied by the curse. He gritted his teeth suddenly, and his palms slightly tilted. The black energy of the group did not directly attack Argos, but instead hit the ground beside him. The slamming wave formed by the power of the curse lifted Argos' heavy body out and hit the wall of the gods, causing him to faint at the scene. He didn't kill him, but just made him lose his fighting power. This choice took away Kalles' great mental strength and made him feel relaxed in control of the spell. He turned to Terran on the other side, and Hermes' messenger was now rolling on the ground, trying to extricate the suffocation of being buried alive by the treasure. His eyes were filled with fear, and the cynical mask had long disappeared. Kalles looked at him, and his heart was filled with wickedness. Talon's indignation, transactions, and the mouth that regarded him as goods were all so sad at this moment. He had to waste his power for this kind of person anymore, just watching coldly as he was tortured by his own greed. Finally, his eyes fell on Elena. The incarnation of the goddess of wisdom is the most special at this moment. Although she was also trapped in the nightmare of Athens, the silver divine light that belonged to Athena was not completely extinguished, but was strongly resisting the invasion of the curse, forming a thin protective cover full of cracks. She closed her eyebrows tightly, her face filled with pain and thorns, and she was obviously in a bitter inner battle. Kalles hesitated. Elena guided him and tried to control him. She protected him, but also served him with a slogan. Their relationship is complicated and difficult. But he couldn't deny that without Elena, he wouldn't have lived now. She was his guide on this journey and the only one who tried to teach him how to coexist with his own strength. He walked up to Elena, looked at her painful expression, and a complex feeling arose in his heart. He stretched out his hand, and this time, the palm of his palm was no longer a striking dark energy, but a more gentle and closer to the empathy power he used in the Lake of Forget. He tried to use his will to touch and calm her chaotic mind. However, just as his fingertips were about to touch Elena's sides, Elena suddenly opened her eyes. In those gray eyes, there was no longer any warmth and stinging that belonged to the incarnation of mortals. Instead, it was a kind of absolute, cold, and dignified power and determination. At the critical moment of life and death, Athena's divine body completely suppressed the incarnation personality Elena and completely controlled this body. It's so bad, Pandora's evil. Her voice is no longer Elena's voice, but a divine thought that is empty, majestic, and echoing in the divine world. She grabbed Karl's stretched wrist, the seemingly delicate fingers that contained unrivaled power. A pure, orderly divine power burst out from her palms, like a pure torrent, penetrated into Karl's body. Kalles felt as if he had been thrown into lava, and the divine power from Athena had the most direct and violent conflict with the violent power of the curse in his body. Two completely different original forces tear and bumped each other in his veins, and the pain brought by them was far beyond any previous backlash. The just awakened dark force in his body, which was enough to overturn the world, seemed chaotic and immature in front of the true divine power of a Lord God. Your power is too dangerous and cannot be allowed to develop. Athena's voice was cold and heartless. She raised the ivory staff with her other hand, and a golden magic star that was extremely complicated at the top of the staff. You will be permanently sealed here until I find a way to purify or control this disaster. This is the most kind thing to you in the world. Kalles looked at Elena in front of him in disbelief. It turns out that the so-called guidance and so-called protection are still imprisonment and sealing. In the eyes of the gods, he is ultimately just a question that needs to be dealt with. Trust and empathy are worthless in the face of absolute order and interests. The great disappointment and the pain of betrayal turned into unprecedented fuel, once again igniting the fire of the curse that was extinguished in his body. Not you, the prisoner. He roared, hissing from his throat. The moment before being completely suppressed by Athena's divine power, Kalles made the final resistance. He no longer used all the remaining power of the curse to attack externally, but instead retracted and poured into the position of his heart. He wasn't trying to detonate this force, but he wanted to use it to complete a crazy betting he had never thought of. He wanted to use the power of the mantra to yell and communicate with the true master of this god's temple, the sleeping god Olympus, who had been sleeping for thousands of years. His will turned into a black flash, penetrated the barriers of the dream realm, and directly touched the deep depth of the huge statue, the sleeping, golden divine origin of the group. "Wake up!" Kalles shouted with his last force. "Your territory is being trampled on by others. Your authority is being damaged. Wake up and drive these intruders with me." He was right. Although Olympus is lazy and difficult to fight, he is one of the 12 main gods of Olympus. He has his own dignity. Athena and Argos used divine power in his divine wand without any hesitation, and had already been exposed to his might. And Kalles' power that originated from the 8th defeat and was enough to distort all dreams was both an offensive and a strange common geese. The next second, the huge statue of the sleeping god in the core of the entire divine temple opened his eyes smoothly. Oh, that cannot be described in words, as vast as the sea of stars in the universe has subsided. It is not an attack or anger, but a pure existence. In the face of this will, whether it is Athena's wisdom power or Argos' thunder power, it is insignificant. This place is forbidden to fight. An ancient and lazy voice echoed deep in everyone's soul, "All, enter, leave." As the voice fell, a gentle and irresistible force swept across the entire divine world. Athena showed a shocked expression on her face for the first time. She tried to resist with her divine power, but found that her power was easily resolved within the territory of this ancient god. The sealing magic in her hand shattered inch by inch, and the hand holding Kalles was also blown by a gentle force. A golden door of light opened behind Athena, and a force pushed her into her with Argos and Tyran, who were unconscious on the ground, and then the door of light disappeared. They were directly expelled from the god of divine deity by the sleeping god Olympus in an unquestionable way. The whole god regained silence. Only Kalles was left, standing in the middle of the hall. The dark aura on his body had faded away, and the power of the curse was consumed in the just explosion and communication with Olympus, making him so weak that he could not stand even harder. He raised his head and looked at the statue of the sleeping god who had opened his eyes. Olympus' eyes fell on him, and that gaze had no judgment, no enemies, only an ancient exhaustion and a silk curiosity. "Interesting. Spirit." The voice of the sleeping god echoed again, but it only roared in Kalles' brain. "Pandora's bloodline. The inheritor of the curse. You woke me up. What do you want?" Kalles gasped and spoke his request with the last force. "I want to know the truth. About Pandora, about the 8th disaster, about myself." Olympus' eyes seemed to flash. "The truth is hidden in the core of the forbidden area, Olympus, the forbidden area. There are Zeus's, the judgment, and the last thing left by Pandora. Go, I will open the last door to the forbidden area." A soft golden light shot out from the forehead of the statue, covering Kalles. He felt that all his fatigue and pain were quickly cured in this light, and his exhausted mental power began to slowly recover. When the light dissipated, he realized that he had stood at the exit of the God of Heaven. In front of me is no longer the mountainous area of Delphi, but a broken land covered by clouds and floating in the air. The air is filled with pure divine power, and you can see the vastness of the great building at a distance. He finally arrived, and the Olympus forbidden land was difficult for mortals to reach. After stepping out of the sleeping god, Kalles found himself standing on a floating bridge made of translucent crystal. Under the bridge is the deep and unsightly cloud sea, and the golden light occasionally flashes through the overturned clouds. It is the purest physical appearance of the divine power of Olympus. On the other side of the bridge is a vast and broken land floating in the air. The group of macroway white marble buildings is undulating, and although most of them have been destroyed, they still exudes a heart-wrenching majesty. This is the Olympus Forbidden Land, a place that only exists in the mythology, the hometown of all gods. The air is filled with divine breath that is so dense that it is almost real, pure and ancient. Here, Kalles felt that the power of the curse in his body was suppressed by an invisible law, and his movements were abnormally scattered, as if a fish had left the water. But at the same time, he could more clearly perceive the essence of this world, every stone and every cloud, soaked in order and power from ancient times. The door that sleeping god Chopunos opened for him has disappeared, and behind him is an empty space, and he has no way out. He took a deep breath, suppressed the shock and anxiety in his heart, and walked past the crystal bridge and stepped onto the land of the forbidden area. The ground under the foot is made of smooth jade, and strange plants that will shine are grown in the gaps. Everything here is completely different from ordinary people, full of extraordinary beauty, and also brings a kind of awesome alienation. He walked around without destination, passing through the vast palaces without a single person. This place is like a huge tomb of gods, retaining its former glory and has long lost the breath of life. He could feel that the great gods Apollo, Ares, Hera, their divine imprints remained in their respective temples, like faded wall paintings, saying the long-dead gifts. According to the guidance of Thupples, he wanted to find the core of the forbidden area, the judgment of Zeus, and the things left by Pandora. But he knew nothing about it here, and could only move forward in the direction where divine power was most gathering. I don't know how long he walked, but he came to a huge round competition venue. The competition venue is much larger than any building in Athens. The stands are carved from a whole piece of white jade, which is enough to accommodate thousands of people. In the middle of the venue, there is a statue of Zeus that is 100 meters high. The statue holds thunder in his hand and looks majestic. It overlooks the entire forbidden area, as if declaring its eternal rule. Here is the core of the forbidden area, the place for judgment. As Kalles stepped into the competition scene, the surrounding scene changed suddenly. In the originally empty stands, there are vague figures composed of light and shadow. They are projections of the will of the Olympus gods. A wave of overwhelming pressure came to him from all directions, which was thousands of times stronger than Argo's divine power. This is a collective review of the entire Olympus line of God. Kalles had both legs soft and almost fell to his knees, but he bit his teeth tightly and straightened his spine. He raised his head, his eyes passing through the suffocating power, and looked directly at the huge statue of Zeus. Pandora's servant, Kalles. A grand, majestic, thunderous sound echoed throughout the competition. The sound did not come from any direction, but directly touched the depths of his soul. It was Zeus, the god-king of Olympus, who spoke to himself through his statue. You are not bound to be in the world, but you can set foot here all the way. Your existence itself is a challenge to the order we have created. Zeus's voice brought no emotion, only pure and majestic power to the supreme ruler. But the sleeping god pleads for you, and the goddess of wisdom still has doubts about you. Therefore, I give you an opportunity to explain it to yourself. Kalles clenched his fist, and he knew that this was not an explanation, but a verdict. A trial that has already been set for the results. What's my fault? Kalles raised his head and shouted with all his strength, his voice weakly and stubbornly in the empty competition. I have never chosen my blood, nor have I ever taken the initiative to harm anyone. All I have done is to survive. Instead, you, the gods of the highest, his words became sharp. You put 7 kinds of disasters into people, and let the world suffer indefinitely, and you are not seeing this. Now, for fear of a force that you cannot control, you must judge me and kill me. Who is challenging order? His words were like a huge rock thrown into the tranquil lake, causing the figures composed of light and shadow in the stands to stir up trouble. There were countless divine thoughts that were shocked, angry, or curious, swept over him. A mortal dares to ask so bluntly before God, this is unprecedented in the history of Olympus. Rareless. Zeus's voice brought anger, and the entire competition scene was shocked. Mortal, do you think you understand order? The release of the 7 disasters is to polish the will of mankind and is a necessary evil for the balance of the universe. And the 8th disaster manifestation in your body is a chaos that can cover all foundations. It can control emotions and distort fate. Once fully awakened, the boundary between God and man will be gone, the free will be turned into a bubble, and the whole world will regain the disorder of order. This is not grinding, this is a destruction. Zeus's voice was like a declaration of truth, with unquestionable power of law, harshly slamming Kalles' heart. He felt that his belief was moving, and could he tell what he was pursuing would really lead to the destruction of the world? Just as his mind was lost, a door of light opened at the other end of the competition field. Argos, Elena and Tyran appeared again. Argos had recovered his movements, and his eyes looked at Kalles filled with unconcealed murder. Terran's face was pale and his eyes were hiding, and it seemed that he had not yet fully recovered from the previous nightmare. And Elena, or Athena, has the most complex expression. She looked at Kalles on the scene, with both the indifference of the gods and the invisible contradictions that belonged to Elena. "Kalles, did you see it?" Zeus's voice echoed again, "Your power will only bring conflict. The goddess of wisdom wants to control you, the god of messenger wants to use you, and I just want to end the source of all this chaos. Now, I give you the final choice." In the center of the competition venue, the ground cracked and two things rose. On the left is a sacred cup shining with the sacred light, filled with golden liquid. "Drink it," Zeus's voice filled with intimacy, "this is a mixture of the water of forgetful river and divine blood. It will wash away your Pandora's blood and erase all your memory and power about the mantra. You will become an ordinary mortal, and I will give you wealth and status, so that you can live your life safely and no longer be trapped by this fate." On the right is a sacrificial fortified by black basalt, engraved with runes of forbidden sacred. "Go on it," Zeus's voice became cold, "you will be permanently sealed at the core of this forbidden territory, your power will be drained, and your soul will fall into an eternal sleep. This is the price you pay for your sins." One is an intimidating explanation, the other is a cool eternal punishment. But Kalles knew that the nature of these two choices was the same, to punish his will and erase the real him. Why is there no third choice? Kalles raised his head and asked with a voice. Why can't I choose to be myself? Learn and control this power in my own way? Because mortals are not worthy of having the power of doubting God. Argos roared angrily and could no longer hold back. He lifted the thunder battle axe and rushed towards Kalles again. Let me come and execute this trial for Zeus, the Great One. However, just before Argos's battle axe was about to touch Kalles, a golden stream of light suddenly shot from the other side of the competition venue, accurately hitting Argos' wrist. Argos screamed in pain, rushed out with his axe and flew out. Everyone's eyes turned toward the direction of flowing light. I saw Terran standing there, holding a short blade made of wind in his hand, and the cynical smile on his face came back, but this time, there was a bit of crazy indecisiveness in his smile. Sorry, Argos. I haven't played this game yet, Talon said frivolously. And, I suddenly realized that it's better to be a godless dog than to be a bigger one. He turned to Kalles and shouted loudly, Kalles. Don't listen to their ghosts. They've never given you a choice, but a shackle. Hold your strength and let it go, let us take this boring chessboard together. Talon's betrayal made the situation become chaotic in an instant. He chose to betray Hermes, betray the entire Olympus, and put all the bets on Kalles. Traitor! Argos was furious and raised his axe and rushed towards Terran again. The two men fought together at a time, and the thunder and the wind collided violently in the competition field. And at this moment, Athena moved too. But her goal is neither Kalles nor the two in the squad. Her figure flashed and appeared under the foot of the huge statue of Zeus. There is an inconspicuous base engraved with the pattern of Pandora's box. Kalles, the truth you want is here. Athena's voice came, no longer the dignity of God, but the anxious voice belonging to Elena. Pandora has left not only disaster, but also hope. She inserted the ivory staff in her hand into the groove of the base and poured her divine power into it. The entire competition venue rumbled and the huge statue of Zeus broke open, revealing a hidden space inside. In the space, there are no treasures, no weapons, only a simple and indifferent pottery floating in the air. That is the essence of Pandora's box. The moment the magic box appeared, Kalles felt the blood in his body boiling, and an unprecedented wave of co-bearing gust surged from the depths of his soul. He knew that there was the final answer about himself and the eighth death. Stop her! Zeus' roar of anger fell from the sky. Argos abandoned Tyran and rushed towards Athena in a crazy way. And Terran rushed to Kalles and blocked Argos' attack route for him. "Go!" Talon shouted, "Your fate is your own choice." Kalles no longer hesitates. He looked at Athena, who tried to seal him, at Argos, who wanted to kill him, at Terran, at the wrathful will of heaven, representing supreme authority. At this moment, he finally made up his mind. He does not have false comfort, nor does he need to be imprisoned forever. He wants to choose the third way. He opened his foot, faced the chaotic battle, and rushed towards the cracked statue of the god, towards the Pandora's box floating in the air. He wants to uncover the truth of his destiny under the attention of all gods. Every step Kalles made towards Pandora's box was like stepping on the rush of time. Argos' roar, Terran's wind roar, and Athena's divine light emitted by the opening of the statue, intertwined around him into a turbulent whirlpool. But in his eyes, there was only the ancient pottery that floated inside the statue, which was the beginning of his destiny and the turning point of his life. "Stop, please stop." Argos dispelled Talon's wrinkle, and the huge thunder axe swept towards Kalles' back with the aura of destroying everything. If this blow is done, it will be enough to turn him into dust in an instant. Just as the hair of 1,000 bells appeared again, barely between Kalles and the battle axe. It was Athena, who had divided some divine power to protect him. "Elena." Kalles was shocked and looked back. "Go and see, Kalles." Athena's face was filled with a complex expression. She gritted her teeth and couldn't maintain the opening of the statue and the protection of Kalles. "No matter what the result is, this is the truth you deserve. Don't let my sacrifices be paid for nothing." In her words, the personality of Elena seems to have taken over the trend again. She finally chose the young man who believed in the way she led, rather than following Zeus's absolute will. Kalles no longer felt hesitant. He turned over and inserted his full strength into the crack of the statue's crack. He stretched out his hand and touched the warm pot. The moment his fingertips touched the magic box, the whole world seemed to be quiet. The noise of the competition venue, the roar of the gods, the collision of power, everything disappeared. He fell into a pure white, borderless space. In the middle of the space, there was a phantom of a woman. Her face was blurred, but the two were filled with sorrow, regret and gentle eyes, exactly the same as what he saw in his dream of being in Athens. "It's Pandora. My descendants." Pandora's voice burst out directly in his soul, gentle and mourning. "You finally arrived. What's going on with all this?" Kalles asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "What is the 8th disaster curse?" "The curse of evil will not be a disaster from now on." Pandora's phantom slammed his head, and there was no silence in her voice. "When Zeus ordered Hephaestus to create me and handed me the box full of what he called a gift, I knew it was a sacred thing. He gave human disasters, but pretended to leave a false comfort named hope at the bottom of the box to show his kindness, so that humans would always rebuff in pain and false expectations, and never be able to repel their dependence on God. I can't resist him, but I don't want human free will to be played with. So the moment before I opened the box, I injected my own blood, my own soul, and my deepest doubts about the divine order of God into the box. I used my blood to create the 8th possibility. It is not used to destroy the disaster of the world, but a weapon for resistance." Pandora's voice became calm. "It allows you to see through the nature of emotions, understand the flow of will, and then remove the shackles of life imposed by the gods on you. It allows mortals to have the power to doubt God, or even modify the rules set by God. Zeus called it a curse because he was afraid that mortals would no longer need them, and that the order they established would collapse." Kalles' body shook. It turns out that the power inside him is not a curse, but a fire of resistance. It is not disaster, but Pandora left to future generations to fight for truly free inheritance. But this power is too strong, and the mind of mortals is difficult to seize. Pandora's voice became terrified again. "It will amplify the darkness in your heart and convince you to become a new tyrant. For countless years, there have been many awakened people among my descendants, but they will destroy themselves because they cannot control their power and be wiped out by Olympus in advance. No one has ever been here like you. Then what should I do? Kalles asked. I feel like I'm about to be swallowed by it. Choose, my child. Pandora's phantom reached out and touched his face lightly. Although it was just a phantom, Kalles felt a warm feeling. You can choose to give it up and let it go back into the magic box and be a mortal who is indifferent. You can also choose to let it go, blend with it, and become an existence that can fight against all gods, but may also lose humanity forever. Or, you can choose the third way. The third way? Find balance. Pandora's voice was filled with expectations. Don't try to press it, nor do you assimilate it. See it as part of you, like your hands, your heart. Use your humanity to guide its divinity, and use your will to seize its power. Become an existence that is neither an ordinary person nor a god, nor a disaster. Become the first, free person in true meaning. As the sound fell, Pandora's phantom began to dissipate, turning into a little light and blending into Kalles' body. The pure white space collapsed, and the noise of the competition scene poured into his ears again. He opened his eyes quietly and found that he was standing inside the statue, holding the ancient pottery in his hand. Outside, Athena's barrier was broken, her mouth was bleeding, and she knelt on her knees. Argos was approaching her step by step, killing her in her eyes. And Terran was hit by a thunder and fell far away, not knowing life and death. The entire situation has collapsed. It's over, Athena. You and this evil drama are finally concluded. Argos raised his battle axe. Kalles looked at everything in front of him, and Pandora's words were still heard in his brain. He lowered his head and looked at the magic box in his hand, and then at the power of his body that was ready to move and desire to release. Give up? He can't do it. After knowing the truth, it is impossible for him to return to the slaughtered life in the past. Release it in the end? He looked at Athena, who was extremely limited to protecting himself, and at Terran, who was fighting for him even though he was selfish. He did not want to become a monster without feelings. Then, there is only the third way left. Kalles took a deep breath and made his choice. He didn't open the magic box, nor did he destroy it. He hugged the magic box tightly to his chest, and then, actively and intentionally, he sank his mind into the dark ocean of curse in his body. But this time, he was not moved in, but walked into his own territory with his master's attitude. I'm not your slave, he said to the chaotic will. You are not my enemy either. You are part of me. From today on, I will make rules for you. He no longer suppresses or releases. He used himself as a person, all the memory, emotions and wills, from the hunger on the streets of Athens, to the fear of the rock Python Valley, from the empathy of the lake of forgetfulness, to the introspection of the sleeping gods, to plan a border for this great force. An unprecedented breath burst out from Kalles. It is not pure darkness, nor is it the light of the sacred gods. It was a gray, chaotic, but also contained the power of clear self-will. His eyes regained their spirits, but his pupils were deep, in a black fog that turned like a star. He walked out of the crack of the statue, and every step was not as stable as it was. Argos felt this strange breath and stopped. What did you do? Kalles didn't answer him. He just raised his hand and grabbed Argos in the direction. There was no shocking explosion, nor did there be no destructive energy waves. Argos just suddenly froze, and he felt a crack in his heart that was indestructible loyalty to Zeus. A sentiment called skepticism was implanted into the core of his will by Kalles. He began to doubt that everything he did really represents justice. Zeus's command must be correct. Although this thought was small, it was like the deadliest poison, which made his proud fighting will collapse instantly. His hand holding the axe began to shake, and his face showed unprecedented confusion and pain. Kalles withdrew his hand and stopped looking at him. He walked to Athena and helped her up. Elena, thank you. Athena raised her head and looked at him in shock. At this moment, Kalles felt completely different for her. He is still a human being, but his existence seems to have surpassed the mortal world, and he has a kind of majesty that even God feels strange. You succeeded? I don't know if this is successful. Kalles looked at his two hands. I just chose a path of my own. He turned his eyes to the sky, where Zeus's will still cover the entire competition venue like a cloud, angry and carrying a piece of silk, jealous. Zeus! Kalles opened his mouth. His voice was not loud, and it was clearly transmitted into the will of every god in the field. I refuse your judgment. From today on, my destiny will be decided by myself. Pandora's inheritance will be inherited and defined by me. I will not become a disaster that destroys the world, but I will never be a pawn in your Olympus's hands. He turned over and walked towards Terran, who was lying on the ground, injecting a gentle vitality into his body, stabbing his wounds. Then, he held Pandora's box and walked step by step towards the exit of the competition venue. No god dares to stop him anymore. Argos was trapped in the quagmire of self-doubt, Athena chose silence, and Zeus in heaven, after feeling the new and undefined power of Kalles, rarely did not descend the divine destruction. Kalles, with his own strength, fought against the entire Olympus divine system and escaped unscrupulously from this trial. He did not defeat God, but he won his own freedom. The order between gods and man has already appeared from the moment he walked out of the competition venue. As Kalles held Pandora's box and walked out of the magnificent competition field step by step, the pressure of Zeus, which covered the entire forbidden area, dissipated like a tide. The projections of the will of the gods composed of light and shadow in the stands also disappeared one by one with the complex emotions of shock, anger, or meditation. The huge competition venue was empty again, leaving only Argos who was in self-doubt, Athena with a complex expression, and Terran, who slowly woke up and had a face full of confidence under the injection of Kalles' vitality. Kalles didn't turn around. He knew that this was not the end, but a brand new and more difficult beginning. What he won was not victory, but a chance to breathe, a qualification to turn from a chess piece into a chess player. The gods of Olympus will never be easy to slap, they are only temporarily shocked by the unprecedented form of power he showed. Once they react from the shock, a more violent storm will surely come. He walked on the floating jade roads in the forbidden area, surrounded by palaces abandoned by gods. The scenery was still strong, but in his eyes there were a few more searches. He could feel that the gray power of mantra that blends human nature and divine nature in his body was flowing slowly and steadily. It is no longer like a wild horse that is defeated, nor is it a prisonered beast, but has become a consulate and still retains its wildness, loyal to his master, but may also be backfired by his master's weakness at any time. He walked to the forbidden area and stopped in front of a cliff that was entrusted to the sea of mortal clouds. Looking from here, you can see the remote land, mountains, rivers, and rivers becoming small. He held the clay pot and thoughts in his heart. Pandora's phantom told him that he could choose to be a free man, but there was no guidance on how to go about this path. Next, where are you going? A sound comes from behind. Kalles didn't have to look back, and he knew who it was. Athena, or, she had regained most of the Helena personality and walked to his side. Her expression was no longer so cold, but she still carried a scattered separation and ring. I don't know. Kalles answered honestly. He looked at the cloud sea. The world is so big that it seems that there is no place for me. When I return to the mortal world, my power will be exposed long ago and will cause endless trouble. I don't want to be with you gods anymore in the divine realm. You are not exactly immortal anymore. Helena looked at him, her eyes shattering. The power within you is both human emotions and divine laws. This is an unprecedented mix. Olympus will not tolerate the existence of such an alien. They will try their best to study you, control you, or decompose you in full. That's so thankful for your reminder. Kalles smiled self-deprecatingly. I'm not threatening you, this is telling the truth. Helena's words were calm. I came to you to fulfill our initial agreement. I said that it will let you know the truth. Now you know, then, what are you going to deal with the Pandora's box in your hand? Kalles looked down at the clay pot. This inconspicuous box is the source of all disasters and the starting point of all resistance. He could feel that in addition to the will imprint left by Pandora, the box also retained the 7 most original breaths of disasters and the faint power called hope. "I will not destroy it, nor will I give it to anyone," said Kalles. "It is the property left by Pandora and a warning. It reminds me of what the nature of power is, and it reminds me not to become what I hate." Elena was silent for a moment, as if measuring his words. "So, have you figured out the next path? Become a wise man, hiding in a corner with this power that can overturn the world until you die?" "No." Kalles shook his head, his eyes flashing with an unprecedented light. "Hide and solve the problem. I have chosen this path and I have to go on. I want to find a meaning that will allow this power to exist, and a balance point that can coexist with divinity and humanity," he said, turning his head toward Elena. "Maybe, I will return to the human world. Not as a robber, nor as a monster, but as an observer, a guardian. You gods are high and have seen the grand order and laws, and have long forgotten the sufferings of human beings. 7 kinds of disasters are raging in the moral world, which you call grinding, but to me, it is only pain." He stretched out his hand, and a gray energy flowed in his palm. "My power can sense and influence emotions. Maybe, I cannot cure the disease and stop fighting, but I can calm the minds of those who are desperate, and I can ignite the hope of those who are crushed by pain. In my way, balance the grinding brought by your gods." Elena's pupils suddenly shrank. She never thought that the power of the curse could still be used in this way. This is not to overturn the order, but to make a replenishment and correction under the existing, cool order. This is a kind of compassion that she has never imagined and belongs to human. This is a very difficult road. She spoke for a long time, with a slight sensation in her voice. "You will be misunderstood by mortals and be hunted by gods. You will be the opposite of all orders, not on either side." "I'm not on either side," Kalles said lightly. Just then another sound of footsteps came. Terran limped over, the scratches on his face were still there, but the sly sarcastic head came back. "Hey, what are you talking about? I've put all my money on you, so you can't just pat your butt and leave." He looked at Kalles, his eyes no longer had pure use and greed, but a complex emotion mixed with awe and excitement. "Seriously, you're just too bad. You're the first one Zeus is so angry that he can't speak. Now the whole Olympus is probably discussing how to deal with you. What are your plans next? Do we want to form a team to rob Hermes' temple?" "I've long been dismissed." Kalles couldn't help laughing as he looked at the allies of the shooting. "I'm not interested in looting the temple. I'm going back to the house." "Going back? That's so boring." Terran curled his lips, "But it seems better to hear than staying here and being chased by a traitor." "Well, since I can no longer go back, I'll be hanging with you. A guy who can handle the pressure of Zeus way head-on, and following you, will have a bright future." Kalles did not agree or refuse. He knew that Terran's refuge was full of spectatorism, but the news and cunning of this guy may be really put on the field in the future. "Okay, I've finished talking. How can I leave this haunted place?" Kalles asked. "The Olympus forbidden area floats high in the sky, and mortals cannot enter and exit freely." Elena looked at him, looked at Terran again, and finally sighed lightly. "I can open a path to the mortal world. But only this time. From then on, the boundary between Olympus and you will be closed. You will be seen as exiled." "I can't find it," said Kalles. Elena stopped talking. She raised her ivory staff and recited an ancient spell. A gentle silver light bridge composed of moonlight and stars extends out from the edge of the cliff, penetrates the sea of clouds and leads to the remote earth. "Let's go," Elena said, "before I change my mind." Kalles clicked the head and finally glanced at her. "Elena, although you cheated me, thank you. You brought me to this point." Elena's eyes flashed and she didn't answer. Kalles stopped stopping. He hugged the Pandora's box and turned around and stepped onto the bridge made of starlight. Terran whistled, following him tightly, like a vocational follower. The figures of the two gradually disappeared into the depths of the clouds. Elena stood alone on the cliff, looking at the direction they were heading for a long time. She knew that what she let go today might be a variable that would be enough to overturn the entire divine realm. But for some reason, deep in her heart, besides worrying, there was also a piece of expectation, even she could not explain. Perhaps, this Pandora Raja, who was forgotten by all gods, can really walk out of the third path and bring new possibilities to this already rigid world. At this moment, Kalles, walking on the bridge of stars, looked back at the vast and golden and magnificent gods behind him, and looked down at the pottery pot symbolizing the suffering and resistance of people. His eyes were incredibly certain. His historical poems never belonged to Olympus. His battleground is in people. The resistance between divine and human nature just kicks off. The order between God and man will be changed by him. Walking on the bridge made of stars and moon, every step is like a farewell. Behind him, the golden and blue floating land in the Olympus forbidden area gradually narrowed in the clouds, and eventually turned into a remote light, like an unreal dream. In front, the breath of everything comes with the moisture of the sea, the fragrance of the soil and the noise of life. This familiar, chaotic and energetic breath finally made Kalles' nervous nerves relax. He was no longer the offender of the trial. He went home, despite this home never really accepted him. I have to say, this thing is much more solid than Hermes' rainbow bridge. Behind him, Terran stomped the bridge made of starlight with curiosity, constantly stumbled on the strange side. But, seriously, are we leaving? Don't go back and add some trouble to them? For example, steal Apollo's lyre for Chiron? Kalles didn't pay attention to his jokes and just walked silently. He could feel that as the distance between him became closer and closer, the gray power of the curse in his body became more alive. It was like a plant that had been drought and raining for a long time, greedily absorbing the complex and diverse emotional energy between people, the husband's expectations before going to sea, the farmer's desire for harvest, the sad separation of people, the first cry of the newborn. These miserable emotions no longer interfered with him like they did in the past, but became part of his power, making him feel that he was connected with the blood of the earth. When their feet finally set foot onto the real land, the bridge of starlight behind them quietly dissipated like a dream bubble. They were surrounded by an uninhabited beach, and far away was a small village built along the mountain. They were cooking in a very peaceful way in the dusk twilight. The thriving and conflicting here from Athens is an inconspicuous corner on the map. After several months. In this remote village on the Aegean Sea, there is a taciturn young man. No one knows where he comes from, he only knows that he calls himself Kalles, a good-handed boat repairman. He rented a deserted stone hut near the village, and his daily life was to repair the broken boats of the people and buy black bread and fish with the meager rewards he exchanged. He rarely spoke, his eyes were always calmly looking at the sea, as if thinking about something deep in the deep. The villagers all thought he was a little weird, but because he never caused trouble and had good skills, he gradually took over this outsider. No one knows that under the bed of this young and simple cottage, there is an ancient pottery that is enough to make all gods crazy. No one knew that whenever he was quiet in the night, he would sit on the reefs by the sea, close his eyes, and extend his perception. His power of the curse has undergone earth-shaking changes. He is no longer just perception, he can clearly see the colors and shapes of each ethereal. The wife in the village who was worried about her husband's unhappiness in the sea, her anxiety was a group of gray fogs that kept turning. The young girl who was worried about gains and losses in her love, her emotions were like a line of pink and dim, and the awe and dependence of the entire village for the sea gathered into a deep and stable blue light. He was like a soul-stirring painter, observing this vivid picture composed of countless emotions. He adhered to his promises and never interfered easily. He just sees, just feels, learns the complexity and fragility of human nature, and also learns how to keep the boundary in his heart in this complexity. For him, this observation is the most painful practice. This day, the sky sank without any signs. The experienced old man looked at the ink-like clouds piled up in the sky, and his face became solemn. "It's the sea god's rage," he murmured, his eyes filled with fateful fear. "The storm is coming." Panic spread like a plague in the village. This was a very unusual storm, with waves slapped on the embankment, roaring like thunder. The Han people tried to drag the boat docked in Hong Kong to the shore, but the violent wind made them difficult to move. The cold rain scattered the hope, extinguishing the last flame in their hearts. This is a disaster, a dignity that mortals cannot resist and comes from the gods. Kalles stood at the door of his cottage, blew his hair wildly. He can see represents the terror and expectation of black and gray eroticism, which is quickly swallowing the originally peaceful blue light of the entire village. He saw a young husband sitting down on the ground because he couldn't move, and letting go. He saw several women hugging each other, crying and praying at the sea, but their prayers were sinking to the sea and they received no response. He clenched his fists. He can't calm the storm like a god, but he can do something that gods disdain to do. He closed his eyes, and the gray power of the curse in his body poured out like a tide. But this time, it did not turn into any offensive form, but was like a gentle, invisible wind, quietly passing through every corner of the village without a sound. He found the young man who fell to the ground, and in his absolute love, he gently injected an unyielding stubbornness, the feeling of Kalles himself being knocked down and got up countless times on the streets of Athens. The young man's body shook suddenly, and his eyes regained his spirit. He roared angrily, grabbed the rope again, and fought with his wild wind with all his strength. He found the crying women, and in their fear, he carefully organized into a warm despite the will he felt from Elena, and would not give up even when facing the situation. Their crying stopped gradually, they stood up with each other, and began to prepare dry clothes and heat for the men, participating in the battle on their own. He will amplify and convey the experience and calmness that old man feels deep in his memory to those panicked young people, so that they will no longer be blind, but will work in an orderly manner to strengthen the dam and save materials. He did not manipulate anyone, nor did he give them false magic. He just awakens them to their own inner self and hides the advantages of fear, courage, impulse, and wisdom. When all this was done, Kalles' face turned pale and his body shook slightly. This large-scale and meticulous emotional guidance consumes a huge amount of energy. This is the price of coexisting with the mantra. Every time it is used, it is an examination of his own will. But he looked at the villagers who were trying to save themselves and support each other in the storm, and an unprecedented sense of peace and satisfaction surged in his heart. This makes him feel the meaning of his existence better than defeating the god in Olympus. The storm lasted all night and finally subsided at dawn. The sun penetrates the clouds, storm on the village where no one died in the devastated village. Although the villagers were exhausted, their faces were filled with joy and pride after the disaster. They relied on their own hands to fight against the disaster. A figure appeared quietly behind Kalles, and was Taran, who was out. He changed into a businessman's outfit and looked much smarter. Have I missed something good? He looked at the messy village, then looked at the white-faced Kalles, and immediately understood something, with a silly chanting in his language. Yes, thank you Lord Savior for your hard work. You are really no one before using the eighth death. He took out a bag of money from the dead and threw it to Kalles. This is the money that last time I sold you a few pieces of jade that had been handed over from the forbidden area. Save some money. He made a decision, his face becoming a little bit serious. I heard some news. Olympus has been very uneasy lately. Your performance seems to be awesome. They brought a lot of shock, and there was a huge disagreement between the gods. Athena took the initiative to observe and study you, and the proletarians led by Ares believed that they must erase you at all costs. Zeus, he remained silent, no one knew what he was thinking. Kalles heard it, without any expression on his face. All of this was in his prediction. Taran looked at his calmness and couldn't help asking, are you really going to stay in this ruined village and build a ship? Keep these mortals who know nothing about your power? Kalles turned over and looked at the sea that was particularly blue after the storm. If the ship is broken, you can repair it, he said quietly, the same is true for human hearts. Just as he finished speaking, he felt a little nervous. His perception penetrated far away and captured a completely new and intense, desperate breath from a prosperous city-state deep in the mainland. It was not a disaster, but a great tragedy and injustice that originated from humans. His eyes were set in that remote direction, his eyes as deep as the sea. A new story is already waiting for him. And he, Pandora's people, and the forgotten inheritor of the eighth disaster, had already prepared to welcome the fate he chose. After bidding goodbye to the quiet village, Kalles embarked on his journey again. Terran followed him like a shadow that could not be shaken off, complaining about the hardships of the journey at the time, and inquire about the rumors from various business teams, adding some fire to their boring itinerary. The destination of Kalles is very clear: Corinth, a commercial city-state known for its wealth, luxury and desolation. That strong, human-induced absolute breath came from there. After several weeks of trek, they finally arrived at the bustling port city. Unlike Athens' elegant style, Corinth is full of impetuous and unconcealed vitality. The air is filled with the smell of gold, spices, and desire. Merchants, sailors, craftsmen and slaves from all over the world gather here, forming the city's bright and stinky appearance and dark and rotten interior. Kalles and Tyran found a cheap hotel to stay in. At night, Kalles walked out of the hotel alone and integrated into the bright night of Corinth's lights. He closed his eyes, spread his perception like an invisible net, and soon found the source of the desperate breath. It comes from the inner city area of the city, a place separated by the high walls of the rich and exists like a city. The hope there is not a single emotion, but a suffocating black spinning made of countless pains. The next day, Kalles changed into a torn dress and walked into the civilian area called the bottom layer. The scene here is more intriguing than the Athenian civilian area where he once lived. The narrow streets are muddy and sewage is flowing. On both sides are wooden sheds that are about to be buried. The skinny children were rummaging for food in the garbage dump, their eyes numb, and they lost the innocence that children should have. The air is filled with the smell of disease, hunger, and hopelessness. He quickly figured out the specific source of the hope. The Corinthians, an obese tribe named Lysimachos, made a very strict tax method in order to build a grand god of sea god Poseidon to highlight his achievements. Rich businessmen can easily use money to pay officials to avoid heavy taxes, and this burden will be transformed into the bottom-level civilians and slaves. Innumerable families were destroyed and their final property was destroyed, and they fell into this desperate purity. What's even more terrifying is that a strange plague is spreading in the civilian area. The sick will gradually lose strength, black spots appear on the skin, and eventually die in pain. But the magistrate didn't know anything about this, but just sent troops to block the place, allowing the people inside to be self-reliant. Kalles walked at the door of a client and heard the squelching crying inside. He pushed open the wooden door and saw a woman holding a child with a swelling and dark spots on his skin, helplessly flowing. The child's weak breathing was like a storm in the wind, which might be extinguished at any time. The woman's desire and the child's pain were like two sharp knives, which hurt Kalles' heart. He remembered his parents who died of illness, and the countless days and nights he died of suffering on the streets of Athens. He stretched out his hand and a gentle gray energy flowed into the child's body. He cannot cure the plague, but he can relieve the pain of his children and allow him to have more peace of mind during his sleep. At the same time, he also passed on a scattered will to the mother who was in a shattered state, so that she had the courage to continue to support her. After doing all this, he turned around and left silently. He knew that it was just a cup of water and car salary. To solve the problem, you must start from the root cause. Back at the hotel, Talon was leisurely tidying his nails with a delicate knife. "How is it, Lord Savior? After seeing the sufferings of people, do you want to be compassionate again?" His temperament was still frivolous, but his eyes were full of curiosity. Lysimachos. Kalles only said this name. Terran whistled. "Oh, the big fat sheep of Corinth. I heard that the guy was so rich that he was so stupid. He put all the wealth of the whole city into his pocket, making the heavens angry and resentful. However, behind him, there was the priest of the temple of the sea behind him, and no one dared to move him." Sea temple. Kalles browed. He could feel that this plague did not form naturally, and in that aura was surrounded by a faint and cold divine power that was not ordinary. I want him to give the money he plundered to the civilians, Kalles said calmly. Terran looked at him like a monster. You're crazy. That's the magistrate. There are more soldiers in his mansion than the ones. What do you want to do? Use your willpower to make him cry and run away, and then spread your money? No. Kalles swung his head, his eyes flashing with a cold, horn-like light. I want him to spit everything out of the whole city of Corinth. A few days later, a remark about the soul of revenge began to quietly spread at the bottom of Corinth. In the story, those unjust souls killed by heavy taxes and plagues will turn into ghosts at night and demand life from the culprit. At first, no one took this seriously. But soon, some of the most ruthless tax officials who collected taxes for the magistrates began to die in surprise while sleeping in 3 places. Their expressions seemed to see the most terrifying thing in the world. This is naturally Karl's work. He used the power of the curse to infinitely amplify the deepest guilt and fear in the hearts of the tax officials, and compiled it into an indelible nightmare, which directly destroyed their spirits. Panic began to spread, gradually spreading to the rich area from the bottom to the bottom. And this is just the beginning. Kalles let Tyran use his silly tongue to spread news in various wineries and markets, connecting the dissolute death of the tax officials with the cool rule of the ruling officials, and adding fuel to the fire of how the soul of revenge will find its ultimate goal step by step. For a while, the whole colons were panicked. And the magistrate Lysimachos finally felt horrified. He couldn't sleep at night, and he always felt countless eyes staring at him in the darkness. He asked the priest from the temple of the sea to pray for him, but it was useless. The power of Kalles, which directly acts on the mind, cannot be stopped by any physical defense or divine prayer. Finally, on a dark night, Kalles came to the outside of the luxurious mansion of the governor. He didn't go in, but just found a hidden corner to sit down, turning his whole mind into an invisible sharp blade, stabbing the fat and terrifying soul deep in the mansion. During his sleep, Lysimachos discovered that he was surrounded by gold coins and bones. The civilians who were killed by him, or resentful who turned into corruption, crawled out of the pile of gold coins and stretched out their thin claws to grab him. He wanted to call for help, but he couldn't make any sound. He wanted to escape, but his foot was firmly tied up by a golden chain. The wealth he loved most in his life now turned into the most terrifying instrument of torture. Give us our lives, ours. The whispers of countless resentful spirits diamonded into his brain like a spell. This is not a dream. Kalles' voice, like a verdict from the earthlings, rose in the depths of his soul. This is your sin. Before sunset tomorrow, send all the wealth you plunder into the city and divide it to those who have been persecuted by you. Otherwise, everything you see tonight will become your eternal dwelling. The next morning, Lysimachos woke up from the bed screaming. His body was covered in cold sweat, and his spirit was already on the verge of collapse. He climbed out of the room and got a series of orders that left all servants stunned. At sunset, a strange scene appeared on the Corinthian city plaza. Boxes of boxes filled with gold and silver treasures were transported to the center of the building by soldiers, piled up like mountains. And the magistrate Lysimachos, as if he had lost his soul, knelt in front of the pile of money, and burst into tears and regretted his crimes towards the heir, and sought the truth of the soul of revenge. The residents of the entire city flocked to the building and watched it all in shock. Those traders in the civilian area could not believe their eyes at first, but after confirming that those wealth could really be used at will, they burst into a shocking cry. The desperate black spiral was brushed into pieces in the golden wave of wealth and joy. Kalles, hiding in the crowd, watched all this quietly. He did not feel the pleasure of revenge, but his heart was calm. He looked at the smiles that regained hope on those wicked faces, and for the first time he clearly felt that his power had found the value of its existence. However, at this moment, a cold and vicious divine will burst out from the temple of the sea gods, locking his position. Who is this? How dare you do this, demon, in the city-state of my believers? An old man wearing a deep blue priest's robe and holding a trident staff walked out of the crowd under the clusters of several temple guards. He is the high priest of the sea god temple and the mastermind behind the plague. He felt the unique, neither god nor demonic power. Kalles' eyes and the high priest's eyes intersected in the air, as if there was an electric light flashing. He knew that after solving the problem, what he had to face next was the trouble from the gods. The wind waves in Corinth are still far from over. With the appearance of the high priest of the sea temple, the hot atmosphere on the square instantly solidified. The joy on the villagers' faces was replaced by a deeply rooted awe of God, and they retreated to create a clearing. The high priest's eyes, which were as scattered as the deep sea, penetrated the crowd and locked tightly on Kalles. At the top of the trident staff in his hand, the blue divine light rippled like water waves, emitting a heart-pounding chill. "It's you." The high priest's voice was so powerful that every word was filled with the revelation of the sea. "It was you who used evil witchcraft to deceive the magistrate and disrupt the order of Corinth. Who are you? Hecate's wizard, or the evil spirit from the underworld?" Kalles didn't answer, but looked back at him calmly. He could clearly sense that the soul of the high priest in front of him had been deeply integrated with the divine will of Poseidon, the god he believed in. But that divine nature is not as powerful as the Lord Olympus, but it is a sense of perverseness, greed and violentness. This also explains the source of the plague. It was an indestructible thing created by distorted divine power. The purpose is probably to create panic and thus strengthen the ruling status of the Temple of the Sea in Corinth. No matter who you are, the high priest saw Kalles silently and lifted the staff in his hand. "In the realm of the sea god Poseidon, all the strangers will be purified." He chanted the ancient spell, and a huge water elemental power gathered from all directions. On the stone floor of the square, a large amount of sea water was poured out in the air, and the water snake that had integrated the numbers of scattered spit out a letter and rushed towards Kalles. The people around the world screamed in shock and fled in all directions. Have they ever seen such a true magical dispute? Terran tightly held the short blade on his waist tightly and prepared to take action at any time. But when he saw Kalles standing still, his face still changing, he suppressed his urge again. The water snake was extremely fast and it was swept to Kalles in an instant. However, Kalles neither hiding nor guarding. He just raised his eyes penetrated the creatures made of magic, and directly locked the master behind them, the high priest. The next second, everyone saw an incredible scene. The swift water snakes suddenly stopped in midair as if they had lost control just a few inches away from Kalles. Their bodies twisted violently and trembled violently, and then they turned toward their creator, the high priest, and turned backwards. The high priest showed a priest's face. He felt that the spiritual link between him and those water snakes was cut off by a strange and domineering force, and the instructions were tampered with. He hurriedly danced his staff and raised a water barrier in front of him. Still. Several water snakes hit the barrier hard, exploding into water splashes, soaking the high priest's body soaked, and the wolf was soaked. What did you do?" He pointed at Kalles in surprise, unable to understand this power beyond his cognition. "I just let you taste the taste of betrayal by what you have created." Kalles' voice was not loud, and it was clearly transmitted into everyone's ears. "Just like you used the name of the sea god to create a plague to harm those who also believe in the sea god." This sentence is like a huge rock throwing into the lake, causing a huge wave among the crowd. Is the plague made in the temple? How can they do this? Suspicion and anger sounds one after another. The people looked at the high priest with no more awe, but more suspicion and hatred. The high priest's face turned blue in an instant. His biggest secret was actually revealed by this mysterious young man. Amid panic and anger, he finally lost his mind. Nonsense. The evil words confusing everyone. He roared wildly, "I want to represent the great sea god, let you decide on the spot." He put the trident staff heavily on the ground. The entire scene was shaking violently, and a divine power that was several times stronger than that just happened rushed from the direction of the sea god temple and poured into his body. The priest robe on his body was automatically unrestrained, and blue divine traces appeared on his skin, and the whole person blew out an inhuman breath. This was his use of the artifacts worshipped in the temple to mobilize Poseidon's deeper power. Feel the anger of the sea. With his roar, the cloud layer that had just cleared up in the sky gathered again, and a huge water dragon fell from the sky, carrying the power of destroying the sky and landing, and fell towards the location where Kalles was. This is no longer a pure divine, but a local celestial call. Facing this attack that was enough to destroy half of the square, Kalles' expression became solemn for the first time. He knew that single skilled will interference could no longer respond to this pure, inverted energy. He must use the power of the curse to a deeper level. He took a deep breath, and the gray energy in his body flew wildly. Instead of fighting the storm that fell from the sky, he extended his perception infinitely, covering the entire building and touching the hearts of every civilian on the scene. He touched their anger about the plague created by the Temple of the Sea, their hate about the ruling rule of the ruling officials, their doubt about the injustice of God, and their desire about life that they were just reborn from the hope of rebirth. All emotions, thousands of complex and true emotions, were guided and gathered by him with the power of the curse. He is not absorbing these emotions, but sharing the birds with him, and leading himself as a new year, leading this torrent of spiritual tide from the mortal collective toward a goal. You represent the gods. Kalles' voice rose clearly and powerfully in the roaring dragon wind, but look at your surroundings and hear their voices. This is the true will. The next second, an invisible willpower formed by the gathering of countless mortals, under the guidance of Kalles, turned into an invisible giant bell, and crashed into the high priest's extremely unstable mind because of his strong borrowing of divine power. Ah! The high priest let out a silence, and he felt that his brain was stuffed with thousands of angry souls, who were shouting, cursing, and doubting. His belief in the sea god was finally destroyed by the torrent of negative emotions from the believers themselves. The link between him and Poseidon's divine power should be interrupted. After losing divine power, the huge water dragon rolled up from the sky, like a giant whose bones were removed, scattered in the air, turning into a heavy rain, extinguishing the anger of everyone on the square and washing away the sins of this city. The high priest fell to the ground like a beach of mud, foaming at his mouth, his eyes scattered, and he turned into a wasteland. He has not suffered any physical damage, but his soul and faith have been destroyed. There was a dead silence on the square. Everyone was shocked by this scene beyond imagination. They saw that the mysterious young man did not use fire or summon thunder. He just stood there and defeated the arrogant high priest of the sea temple by some power they could not understand. What he won was not only a battle, but also a heart of the people. Kalles let out a breath and his face turned pale a little. The collective emotion of driving is extremely burdened to him. But he looked at the gazes around him that turned from shock to awe and even brought a gratitude, and his heart was silent. He completed a judgment on God's power in his own way. He didn't look at the saber-like high priest again and turned around and prepared to leave. Wait! A voice stopped him. It was the woman who once asked him for help with a child in her arms. She bravely walked out of the crowd, holding the child who had already faded and had a lot of elegance. She knelt in front of Kalles, with a purplish water in her eyes. Thank you, sir. Which messenger of the god are you? Please leave your name. We want to build a divine temple for you. More people came up, and they looked at Kalles' eyes as if they were looking at a new god. Kalles looked at them and gently slammed his head. I am not a messenger of any god, nor is I a god. He leaned down, helped the woman up, looked into her eyes, and said sincerely, it is not me who can fight all of this, but the courage and anger in your own hearts. Never trust hope on the statue of a god without any sacrificing power. After speaking, he turned around and walked into the alley in awe of the crowd. After that, the two of them quickly disappeared from the crowd's vision. It was long after they left that the people on the square dispersed. But everything that happened today was like a seed, in the hearts of every Kalles. For the first time, they realized that gods are not eternal and correct, and that the will of mortals can also have the power to change their destiny when they gather together. And on the sanctuary of Olympus away from Corinth, someone overlooking the will of man can see everything. Zeus, who had been silent for a long time, had an unprecedented solemn look in his eyes. What Kalles did was more dangerous than directly challenging his authority. He is not destroying the order, but establishing a new order in the hearts of mortals that can replace the faith of the gods. This is the most fundamental movement to the fundamental cure for Olympus. A real storm that spreads to both the gods and men is quietly curling.